How did ancient people move stones so massive they seem impossible even today? Some of these blocks weighed as much as entire houses, yet they were transported across mountains, rivers and deserts without cranes, engines or modern machines. Were these builders simply engineering geniuses? Or have we underestimated what ancient civilizations were truly capable of? Today, we'll uncover the incredible methods, forgotten technologies, and enduring mysteries behind the greatest stone monuments ever created. Before we begin, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with fellow history lovers. Now let's journey back to the age of the world's greatest builders. The stone lies half buried in the earth like a fallen piece of a mountain too large to belong to the human scale of things. Rainwater gathers in shallow cracks across its surface. Wind carries dust into the grooves left by ancient tools. Around it, the modern world has learned to measure, photograph, scan, and explain, yet the first feeling remains almost primitive disbelief. The block is not merely heavy, it is enormous in a way that seems to push against the imagination. It does not look as though people should have moved it. It looks as though the landscape itself should have shifted around it. Across the ancient world, stones like this appear again and again. They stand upright in open fields. They form walls so tightly fitted that a blade can barely enter between them. They rise as pillars, temples, tombs, platforms, circles, pyramids, roads, and silent faces staring toward the sea. Some were dragged across plains. Some were lowered from cliffs. Some were lifted into place above human heads. Some were quarried but abandoned, still attached to the bedrock, as if the builders reached a point where ambition became heavier than possibility. In Egypt, obelisks were cut from granite and prepared for journeys down the Nile. In Britain, stones were carried across distances that still trouble simple explanations. In the Andes, blocks with many sides locked together like pieces of a living puzzle. On a remote island in the Pacific, great statues were moved across volcanic ground, with no draft animals, no metal cranes, and no large forests left to waste. At Baalbek in Lebanon, foundation stones of almost unbelievable mass sit within an ancient sanctuary, while even larger unfinished blocks remain in the quarry nearby, reminding anyone who sees them that ancient engineering was not only a matter of success but also of limits. The mystery is not that ancient people used stone. Stone is everywhere. It is durable, visible, and older than memory. The mystery is that some societies chose stones so difficult, so stubborn and so overwhelming that every step required planning on the edge of failure. A small stone can be carried, a larger one can be rolled, a heavy block can be dragged. But there comes a scale where ordinary action breaks down. Ropes snap, sledges sink, workers tire, roads deform, wooden supports crack. A slight slope becomes dangerous. A few degrees of misalignment can trap a block forever. The ancient builders who moved stones like mountains were not simply lifting objects. They were managing risk, labor, landscape, belief, and time. Before we go deeper, take a moment to like the video and subscribe if this is the kind of history and mystery you enjoy. What makes these stones so powerful is that they survive without explaining themselves fully. Wood rots, rope vanishes, mud ramps wash away, songs of labor are lost. The names of many workers disappear. The small decisions that made impossible movement possible are rarely written down, and in many cases writing did not yet exist. What remains is the final result, a stone standing where it did not naturally stand, a wall. Made from blocks, no casual village could have handled a monument aligned with a horizon that mattered to people whose thoughts are only partly recoverable. The evidence remains incomplete, and that incompleteness is exactly where fascination enters. A finished monument can look effortless after thousands of years. The effort has vanished. The strain has been erased. The sweat, shouting, feeding, repairing, calculating, waiting and grieving are gone. Only the stone remains calm and immovable, as if it had always been there. Yet these stones were not placed by magic, and they were not placed by accident. The more archaeologists study them, the clearer one fact becomes. Ancient people were capable of organizing work with a precision that modern observers have often underestimated. They may not have had engines, steel cables, hydraulic cranes, or computer models, but they had other forms of intelligence. They understood friction through touch. They understood slope through exhaustion. They understood stone by breaking it. They understood timing through seasons. They understood bodies in numbers. They understood that one person pushing against a block is almost nothing but hundreds of people pulling in rhythm can become a force as real as any machine. Still, no single explanation fully accounts for every ancient megalith. The world of giant stones is not one story but many. The methods that worked in the Nile Valley did not automatically work in the high Andes. The choices made on Rapa Nui were not the same as those made on Salisbury Plain. A granite obelisk, a limestone foundation block, a sandstone circle, and a volcanic statue each demand different answers. Some stones were floated, some were dragged. Some may have been rocked forward. Some were levered inch by inch. Some were lifted with earth packed gradually around them. Some were shaped near their final location, while others travelled from far-off sources because the stone itself carried meaning. Scholars still debate details because the surviving clues are uneven. One site preserves tools but not roads. Another preserves roads but not the ropes. Another preserves abandoned stones but not the labour camps. Each place offers a fragment of a vanished system. The oldest monuments reveal that this story begins much earlier than most people once imagined. Long before famous empires built palaces and temples, communities without writing were already gathering around stone. At places such as Göbekli Tepe in southeastern Anatolia, large carved pillars were erected by people who lived before farming was fully established in the region. That fact remains startling even in sober archaeological language. Monumental construction did not simply appear after cities, kings, and bureaucracies. In some cases, the desire to gather, carve, raise, and remember may have helped pull people toward more complex social life. The stones were not just products of civilization. Sometimes they may have helped create it. This is one of the stranger truths hidden behind ancient engineering. Moving a giant stone is never only technical, it changes the people who attempt it. A community that decides to move a massive block must feed workers who are not farming that day. It must make ropes, tools, sledges, or rollers. It must choose leaders or coordinators. It must settle disputes. It must agree or be compelled to spend human energy on something that does not immediately fill a stomach. The project becomes a test of social power. It reveals who can command labour, who can inspire devotion, who can store food, who can plan beyond a single season. A stone monument may look silent, but it is often the fossil of an organised society. And there is another layer beneath that. The stones were heavy in more than one sense. They carried memory, identity, fear, and hope. A standing stone might mark a burial place, a boundary, a sacred gathering ground, or a connection to ancestors. A pyramid might bind royal power to the horizon and the afterlife. A wall might proclaim control over a mountain landscape. A statue might hold the presence of the dead before the living. What survives in the record suggests that people did not move difficult stones merely because they could. They moved them because difficulty itself mattered. The labour made the meaning visible. A small marker could be ignored. A mountain-like stone demanded attention. It told every generation afterward that someone had once gathered enough will to command the impossible. Modern people often stand before these monuments and imagine lost machines. That reaction is understandable. The stones seem to ask for machinery because machinery is how the modern world answers weight. But ancient builders lived inside a different relationship with force. They did not separate engineering from the landscape as sharply as modern industry does. A river was not scenery, it was a moving road. A frozen surface could become a temporary path. Wet clay could reduce friction. A hillside could become a ramp. Earth itself could be piled, cut, packed, and removed. The line between tool and environment was fluid. A wooden lever, a human shoulder, a stone hammer, a rope of plant fibre, a muddy track, and a seasonal flood could all belong to one system. The scale of the achievement becomes clearer when failure is included. Ancient quarries are full of ambition interrupted. A cracked obelisk lies abandoned at Aswan, still attached to the granite from which it was being freed. Enormous blocks near Baalbek remain in place, too large or too flawed or too inconvenient to complete. These failures are precious because they strip away the illusion of effortless mastery. They show experimentation, they show judgment, they show that ancient builders sometimes reached too far, discovered the stone would not cooperate and left behind a lesson in the ground. The builders were not supernatural, they made mistakes, they adjusted, they learned through resistance. That resistance is where the real drama lives. A stone does not care about belief. It does not care about royal command or sacred urgency. It obeys gravity, fracture, friction, and mass. To move it, ancient people had to meet the physical world honestly. They could decorate a monument with myth, but they could not persuade a block to become lighter. Their success depended on practical knowledge passed through hands and bodies, through repeated work, through small improvements that rarely entered written history. The result is a paradox. The monuments are visible, but much of the intelligence that made them possible is invisible. So the story begins not with a single lost secret, but with a wider human pattern. Again and again, in different places and different centuries, people looked at stone and saw more than material. They saw permanence in a world of decay. They saw authority in weight. They saw a way to speak to descendants they would never meet. They saw a challenge worthy of a community's strength, and once they began, the stone changed from obstacle to message. It became a mountain taught to move, then ordered to stand still. The world that produced these monuments was not empty of technology, but it was filled with a kind of technology that modern eyes can easily overlook. When people imagine ancient builders before iron and engines, they sometimes picture a primitive scene, bare hands against stone hope, against gravity, bodies thrown at a problem until enough force somehow appears. That image is misleading. The early builders who handled great stones lived in worlds of tools, craft memory, experiment, and inherited skill. Their equipment was simpler than modern machinery, but simple does not mean crude. A rope can be simple and still change history. A lever can be simple and still multiply human strength. A sled can be simple and still carry a weight no body could lift. A ramp made of earth can disappear after use, yet while it exists it can do the work of a machine. Before iron became common, stone itself was worked by other stones, by fire, by water, by sand, by wood, by bone, by copper, in some regions by bronze in later ones, and by endless patience. Hard stone could be pounded with harder stone. Softer stone could be cut, scraped, dressed, and smoothed. Grooves could be made slowly. Surfaces could be shaped by abrasion. Wedges could be driven into cracks. Wooden pegs could be inserted into holes and soaked until swelling pressure helped split rock apart. Fire could heat a surface and water could shock it. None of these methods look spectacular in a painting, but together they gave ancient workers a practical command over material that appears almost immovable, when viewed only as a finished monument. The difference between the ancient and the modern world was not that one had intelligence, and the other did not. The difference lay in energy. Modern engineering rests on dense controllable energy. Fuel electricity engines, hydraulics, steel concrete and machines that can repeat force without tiring. Ancient engineering rested on distributed energy, human muscle animal strength, where animals were available, gravity-flowing water, seasonal conditions and the stored calories of a society able to feed workers. A modern crane concentrates power in a single machine. An ancient building project spreads power through people, terrain and time. This makes the old work slower, more vulnerable and harder to reconstruct, but not impossible. Many ancient builders did not have the wheel in the way modern people assume. In some societies, wheeled vehicles were unknown, impractical, or simply not useful for the terrain and loads involved. Even where wheels existed, they were not always the answer. A wheel that works for a cart does not automatically solve the problem of a stone weighing many tons. Axles break. Roads must be firm and prepared. Loads must be balanced. The wheel is one of humanity's great inventions, but giant stone often demanded other solutions. A heavy block on a sledge pulled over a prepared surface could sometimes be safer and more controllable than a block raised dangerously onto wheels. The evidence remains incomplete at many sites, but the surviving traces suggest that ancient builders often preferred stability over elegance. They also lived before steel cables, but they did not live without rope. Rope may be one of the most underestimated technologies in the ancient world because it rarely survives. Plant fibers decay, leather rots, wood disappears. Yet ropes made from flax papyrus, palm fiber grasses, bark reeds, or other materials could bind, pull, stabilize, and coordinate labor. A rope is not only a line, it is a way of joining many bodies into one force. It lets workers pull from a safer distance. It allows direction to be controlled. It can hold a stone upright guide, a sledge restrain a load on a slope, or keep a monument from tipping too fast. When rope vanishes from the archaeological record, the movement it made possible can start to look mysterious. Wood, too, was more important than its survival allows us to see. Wooden sledges, rollers, rails, levers, frames, wedges and scaffolds were part of the invisible architecture of ancient stonework. In dry environments, some wooden objects survive. In wetter regions, most are gone. A stone circle may remain for thousands of years while the entire wooden world that raised it becomes soil. This creates a distortion in memory. The permanent material receives all the attention while the temporary technology disappears. The ancient builders knew this. They were not building museums of their tools. They used what worked, discarded, what broke repaired, what could be repaired, and left behind only the stone that mattered. This is why it is so difficult to judge ancient engineering from monuments alone. A standing stone can hide a vanished mountain of earth that once surrounded it as a ramp. A smooth wall can hide scaffolding that held workers close to its face. A colossal statue can hide the dragging track that once crossed the island behind it. A pyramid can hide the temporary roads, labour settlements, bakeries, storage areas, copper workshops and administrative routines that fed its construction. What looks like a single act of lifting may actually have been a long sequence of small manageable acts. The ancient world often solved big problems by refusing to treat them as one big problem. Instead, builders broke the impossible into stages. First came selection. Not every stone was worth moving. A block had to be the right type, the right size, the right shape, the right quality, and in many cases the right symbolic character. Then came extraction. Cutting a stone from bedrock without shattering it required knowledge of grain fracture and weakness. Then came rough shaping, because removing excess stone at the quarry reduced the burden of transport. Then came movement from quarry to root. often one of the most dangerous phases because the stone had to leave the place where it naturally belonged. Then came transport across land or water, then final shaping, lifting, setting, finishing, and sometimes polishing or carving. At any point, disaster could ruin years of preparation. A surprising detail is that ancient builders did not always seek perfect efficiency in the modern sense. They often accepted methods that were slow, repetitive, and labor-intensive because labor could be organized in seasons when agricultural work allowed it. In floodplain societies, the rhythm of water could shape the rhythm of construction. When fields were flooded or farming demands temporarily shifted, workers could be gathered, fed, and assigned to state or communal projects. In other places, ritual calendars may have drawn people together for gatherings, where work ceremony, exchange, and feasting blended into one social event. Scholars still debate exactly how voluntary, obligated, or coerced different labor systems were, and the answer almost certainly varied from place to place. But the old idea that every great stone must have been moved only by enslaved masses is too simple. Some projects used forced labor, some used paid or provisioned crews, some may have used community labor tied to belief and identity. The stones do not give one answer. The human body itself was treated as part of the engineering system. Builders understood that force was not just a matter of number, but of timing. 10 people pulling badly can waste effort. 10 people pulling together can shift a load that seemed fixed. Rhythm matters, direction matters, a leader's signal matters, the angle of a rope matters, the smoothness of the surface matters. Even water poured before a sledge can matter, as shown by Egyptian imagery, and later experiments suggesting that controlled wetting of sand can reduce resistance when done properly. Too much water turns ground unstable. Too little leaves friction high. The useful answer lies between extremes in practical knowledge gained through experience. Ancient builders also had mathematics, though not always in a written form, recognizable to later scholars. They measured with chords, rods, sightlines, plumb bobs, levels, shadows, stars, and repeated proportions. Geometry can begin with a stretched rope and a careful eye. Alignment can be achieved through observation long before advanced instruments exist. A straight path matters when moving a stone. A gradual slope matters when dragging one upward. A level platform matters when raising one upright. The more demanding the monument, the more precise the preparation must become. It is tempting to admire only the final block, but often the hidden achievement is the surface beneath it. This older world, then, was not a world without machines. It was a world where the machine was spread across many things: the ground, the rope, the sledge, the lever, the ramp, the river, the season, the overseer, the workers, the food stores, the quarry face, and the accumulated memory of people who had done similar work before. No single part explains the monument. Together they created a system powerful enough to move stone on a scale that still feels strange. What survives in the record suggests a civilization does not need engines to think mechanically. It needs observation organization, and the willingness to spend time against resistance until stone begins slowly to obey. The first great experiments in moving stone do not appear as a single invention spreading cleanly across the world. They appear more like sparks in different landscapes wherever people begin to gather around a shared idea larger than daily survival. A stone is found, tested, struck, dragged a short distance, set upright and remembered. Then another stone is chosen, perhaps larger, perhaps harder, perhaps farther away. At first, the effort may be local and rough, a matter of using what lies nearby. But once people discover that a heavy stone can be moved, the boundary of the possible shifts. The next generation does not begin from nothing. It inherits the memory of the earlier attempt, including its injuries, mistakes, celebrations and quiet practical lessons. Over centuries, that memory becomes technique. In many places, the earliest monument builders worked without cities' kings or written records. That is one of the most important clues in the whole story. Monumental stone construction was not always the final expression of a mature state. Sometimes it appeared among communities that were still experimenting with settlement, food production, ritual gatherings, and social hierarchy. At first glance, this seems backwards. It is easy to assume that people build great monuments only after they have agriculture, surplus grain rulers, scribes, and administrators. Yet archaeology suggests a more complicated pattern. In some regions, the act of building together may have helped create the conditions for larger society. The monument was not just a result, it was a gathering force. At Göbekli Tepe in what is now southeastern Turkey, large T-shaped limestone pillars were carved and raised by communities living at the edge of a transforming world. The people who made them were not modern industrial builders, nor were they simple wanderers, casually stacking stones between hunts. They belonged to networks of skilled, observant, socially connected groups, capable of returning to important places, organizing labor-shaping stone, and investing meaning in forms that still unsettle easy categories. The pillars bear carved animals, abstract signs, belts, arms, and hands, suggesting that the stones themselves may have represented beings rather than mere supports. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate how the site functioned, but its existence shows that large stone could become central to social life before many of the institutions once thought necessary for such work. The engineering at such early sites was not on the scale of later pyramids or Roman foundations, but scale alone is not the point. The crucial development was conceptual. People learned that bedrock could be separated into planned forms. They learned that a pillar could be shaped while lying down, transported over a manageable distance, and set upright in a prepared socket. They learned that enclosure walls could guide space and movement. They learned that stone could hold images long after wood and paint disappeared. They also learned, perhaps more painfully, that every increase in size produced new problems. A small upright stone can be corrected by several people. A larger one can crush them. A block that moves easily on dry ground may become trapped after rain. A pillar raised too quickly may fall beyond control. Early megalithic work was a school of consequences. Other early traditions developed in different ways. In parts of Western Europe, tombs and stone settings emerged over generations as farming communities reshaped their landscapes. Massive capstones were raised over burial chambers. Long barrows and dolmens turned stone into architecture for the dead. At Karnak in Brittany, rows of standing stone stretch across the land in numbers that still feel strange, even when individual stones are not the largest in the world. Their alignment, repetition, and endurance suggest a society able to return again and again to the same monumental grammar. What survives in the record suggests not a single day of construction, but a landscape gradually taught to speak through stone. The surprise is that many of these early monuments were not built in isolation from everyday life. They were often tied to movement across the landscape, to burial, to seasonal gathering, to exchange, and to the negotiation of belonging. A stone carried from one place to another could bring a fragment of one landscape into another. A tomb built from slabs could make the dead present among the living. A line of stones could mark a path, a boundary, a memory, or an event no longer recoverable. Modern observers often focus on mechanics because mechanics are visible in the question of weight. But the people moving these stones likely experienced the work as social and sacred before they experienced it as engineering. The two were not separate. The same hand that pulled a rope may have understood the task as devotion, duty, fear, rivalry, or inheritance. Trial and error shaped everything. Quarrying was especially unforgiving. Stone that looks solid from the outside may hold hidden cracks. A block can be nearly freed and then split at the wrong angle. A pillar can survive shaping but fail during transport. Builders had to read stone by sound, colour, texture and fracture. A practiced worker could learn whether a hammerstone ran cleanly or dully, whether a surface would flake, whether a seam could be exploited, whether a mass was worth the labour. This kind of knowledge rarely leaves writing behind, especially in societies without scribes, but it leaves traces in abandoned cuts, unfinished pieces and repeated forms. The record suggests that early builders were not guessing blindly. They were experimenting within traditions of accumulated craft. The tools were often modest. Hammerstones, antler picks, stone mauls, wooden wedges, digging sticks, fibre ropes, sledges and packed earth could accomplish more than they appear to promise. Their power came from repetition and coordination. A groove cut a little deeper each day eventually becomes a separation line. A stone rocked back and forth with levers can shift by tiny degrees until balance changes. A pit dug beneath one side can allow a block to tilt. A socket can hold the base of an upright while ropes restrain the upper end. Earth can be packed around a rising stone to support it until it stands. None of this requires a secret technology, but all of it requires patience, judgment, and a willingness to trust a process that may take longer than one season. In some cases, the earliest experiments may have involved stones far smaller than the monuments that later became famous. This matters because knowledge scales unevenly. Moving a 1-ton stone teaches lessons, but a 10-ton stone is not simply 10 times the same problem. Rope thickness, ground pressure worker, spacing friction, fatigue steering, and risk all change. At larger scale, small errors become serious. A slight bump can stop a sledge. A small crack can destroy a block. A brief loss of rhythm can cause the pulling team to collapse into disorder. The learning curve from local stones to mountain-like stones must have been long and sometimes brutal. The elegant monuments that survive are the visible successes from a much wider world of failed or forgotten attempts. One lesser-known truth is that the earliest builders may have relied as much on ceremony as on command. A gathering to move stone could be accompanied by feasting, exchange courtship, alliance-making, and shared memory. Food remains near some ancient monumental sites suggest that communal consumption was often part of the larger event. The work itself may have been difficult, but the gathering could strengthen ties between groups that otherwise lived apart. In this sense, the stone was both object and occasion. It justified people coming together. It gave shape to collective effort. It created a memory so intense that the finished monument became only one part of what the event meant. The more these experiments succeeded, the more ambition could grow. Once a community had raised a standing stone, it could raise several. Once it had built a chamber, it could build a longer tomb. Once it had carved one pillar, it could carve another with deeper relief and stronger symbolism. Stone invited escalation because stone preserved achievement. A wooden monument might impress one generation and vanish. A mound could soften. A painted surface could fade. But a raised stone remained challenging descendants either to maintain it, reinterpret it, or surpass it. The ancient landscape became a conversation between the living and the already built. This is where the story begins to widen. The first great experiments were not merely technical rehearsals for later wonders. They were the beginning of a human habit, gathering bodies around a weight too large for any one person, turning labour into memory, and using stone to make social imagination visible. The builders learned from the ground, from broken tools, from trapped blocks, from successful lifts from elders who remembered what failed before. They did not yet move the largest stones in history, but they had crossed the essential threshold. They had learned that a piece of the earth could be taken from its ancient bed shaped by human intention, moved across a landscape and made to stand as if it had chosen the place itself. The clearest clues to ancient stone moving often do not stand in temples or circles or finished walls. They lie behind the monuments in the places where the work began and sometimes failed. A quarry is less graceful than a sanctuary, less famous than a pyramid, and less mysterious at first glance than an upright stone on a lonely plain, but it is one of the most honest archaeological landscapes on Earth. There the stone is not yet transformed into symbol. It is still raw, stubborn, partly trapped in bedrock marked by blows and cuts. The quarry preserves decisions. It preserves hesitation. It preserves the moment when ambition met the physical character of the earth. To follow a megalith back to its source is to reverse the illusion of permanence. A finished monument suggests completion, intention, and authority. A quarry reveals uncertainty. Blocks are half-shaped. Channels are cut around stone masses. Tool marks run in repeated lines where work is struck again and again. Some stones are freed on three sides but still joined underneath, waiting for a final separation that never came. Others are rough-shaped and abandoned, perhaps because a flaw appeared, perhaps because transport proved too difficult, perhaps because the project changed, or because the people who planned it lost power, labour, or time. The evidence remains incomplete, but abandoned stones are among the most valuable witnesses because they show the process before it was cleaned away. At Aswan in southern Egypt, an unfinished obelisk still lies in the granite bedrock, immense and silent, its intended form visible but never completed. It was meant to become one of the largest obelisks ever made, yet a crack made the project useless. That crack is more revealing than success would have been. It shows that even Egyptian engineers with all their skill and organization could not command stone absolutely. They could read it, test it, strike it, shape it, and plan around it, but hidden weakness remained a danger. The unfinished obelisk also shows the method of extraction in remarkable detail. Workers cut trenches around the stone, pounding and removing granite with hard stone tools, leaving behind marks that still speak of repeated impact. The obelisk was not melted free, lifted by lost machines, or summoned out of the rock by forgotten forces. It was attacked patiently with labour organised at a scale modern visitors can feel in their bones. The quarry is important because it changes the question. Instead of asking only how a finished monument got there, it asks how a stone became movable in the first place. This first step was often the most delicate. Stone in the ground has support. Stone separated from the ground becomes vulnerable. It can crack under its own weight. It can twist unexpectedly. It can jam against the quarry floor. A block too heavy to maneuver out of the quarry might be useless no matter how perfect its shape. Ancient builders had to plan the path of departure before the stone was fully born. A quarry was not just a place of cutting, it was the beginning of the transport route. At many sites, the landscape around the quarry holds faint traces of this planning. There may be ancient roads, sled tracks, levelled paths, ramps, spoil heaps, working floors, or areas where rough shaping reduced weight before movement. These traces are often fragile. Later erosion, farming, construction, looting, and natural change can erase them. Wood and rope vanish, and even roads made of packed earth can dissolve into the surrounding soil. What survives in the record suggests that ancient builders often prepared routes with great care, but it also shows why so many details remain debated. The heaviest part of the work was sometimes supported by the most temporary materials. Quarries also reveal that ancient builders were practical in ways that undercut romantic theories. They did not always choose the nearest stone, but they rarely ignored convenience without reason. If a particular type of stone came from far away, that distance usually mattered. It might have been stronger, more beautiful, easier to carve, linked to a sacred landscape, associated with ancestors or valued because its origin was known. Stone was not only material, it could carry the identity of its source. But once the decision was made, practical reduction began. Rough shaping at the quarry made sense because every unnecessary piece of stone added to the burden. A block intended for a statue pillar or wall might be trimmed before transport, though too much finishing before movement could risk damaging delicate features on the road. Builders had to balance weight against vulnerability. The marks left by tools are especially revealing. In some limestone quarries, broad cuts and extraction trenches show how softer stone could be separated with picks, chisels and wedges. In harder stone such as granite, the evidence often shows pounding with dolerite or other hard hammerstones, a method that is slow but effective. Repeated blows bruised, crushed and removed the surface little by little. Sand could be used as an abrasive. Copper tools, where available, helped with softer materials but were not magic blades against the hardest stone. The ancient workers' world was one of material limits. Different stones demanded different strategies, and expertise meant knowing which technique belonged to which rock. A lesser-known detail is that unfinished stones can sometimes be larger than the stones that were actually moved. This is not accidental. Ambition often reaches beyond execution. At Baalbek, the quarry contained enormous blocks that were shaped but left behind, including stones larger than those used in the sanctuary's famous platform. Their presence has inspired all kinds of speculation, but they also fit a very human pattern. Builders sometimes began projects that later proved impractical or unnecessary. A stone can be impressive precisely because it never moved. It marks the outer boundary of what planners hoped to do, not necessarily what they could complete. No single explanation fully accounts for every abandoned block, but their existence warns against treating ancient builders either as helpless primitives or as possessors of unlimited lost powers. They were ambitious people working under real constraints. The quarry floor also shows the hidden labour of waste. For every monumental block that reached its destination, much stone was removed, broken, discarded, or left as rubble. The clean geometry of a finished monument hides a violent subtraction. Workers had to dig channels, clear debris, keep working spaces open, sharpen or replace tools, haul away fragments, and manage dust, heat, and injury. In a large quarry, the soundscape would have been relentless. Stone striking, stone commands, scraping, dragging, the dull rhythm of repeated blows. The finished temple may feel serene, but its origin was noise. From the quarry, the stone's first movement was often the most psychologically important. A block still attached to bedrock belongs to geology. A block freed from it enters human history. That transition required control over balance. The underside had to be released. The stone might be lifted slightly with levers packed underneath, slid onto a sledge, or eased down a prepared slope. A mistake here could destroy the whole effort. It is easy to imagine transport as the main problem, but in many cases the true danger began at the quarry mouth, where a massive object had to pass from stable earth into uncertain motion. Ancient roads connected this world of extraction to the world of monument. Some were simple prepared tracks, others were more elaborate with stone paving retaining walls or carefully graded slopes. In Egypt, roads could lead from quarries toward the Nile, where boats transformed the problem of land transport into river transport. In the Andes, routes had to negotiate mountains, ridges, valleys, and earthquake-shaped terrain. In Britain, the sources of certain stones point toward long journeys across mixed landscapes, where land, river, and perhaps coastal movement may all have played roles. Scholars still debate details because routes are difficult to prove when the materials that made them workable have vanished. What the quarries prove most clearly is that ancient stone moving was never a single miraculous moment. It was a chain of decisions beginning deep in the ground. The monument starts with the choice of a seam, the sound of a test blow, the recognition of a flaw, the angle of a trench, the width of a working space, the shape of a rough block, the path out of the quarry, and the courage to separate weight from the earth. Long before any stone towered above a crowd, it had already passed through a hidden drama of selection and risk. That is why the abandoned stones are so haunting. They are not failures in a simple sense. They are records of thought interrupted. They show where builders paused, misjudged, adapted, or gave up. They remind the modern observer that the ancient world did not move mountains because it was free from limits. It moved them because it learned where the limits were pressed against them, and sometimes found just enough space for a stone to begin its journey. Once the stone had left the quarry, the mystery became less about cutting and more about people. A block on a prepared sledge is not yet a monument. It is a danger waiting to happen, a weight that must be persuaded forward without breaking the road, the ropes, the tools, or the bodies around it. This is where ancient engineering becomes almost social in its deepest form. The stone moves only when many separate actions become one action. Pullers, pushers, water carriers, rope handlers, path builders, overseers, cooks, toolmakers, and watchers along the route all become parts of the same machine. The machine breathes, it sweats, it eats, it tires. But if it is organized well enough, it can move a mountain one slow length at a time. Modern people often ask how many workers were needed to move a great stone, but the number alone is never enough. 100 people pulling badly may do less than 50 pulling well. The arrangement of bodies matters. The angle of ropes matters. The condition of the track matters. The timing of effort matters. A heavy load resists first, then sometimes gives with a suddenness that can be dangerous. Workers must keep force steady. They must avoid jerks that snap fibers or unbalance the sledge. They must respond when the route slopes, when the ground softens, when a runner digs into mud, when the stone begins to drift sideways. This kind of work demands discipline, not just strength. Human labour in ancient monumental projects was probably more varied than old stereotypes suggest. There were certainly societies where coerced labour captives or enslaved people played roles in heavy construction. There were also projects supported by tax labour, rotating crews, skilled specialists, seasonal workers, paid labourers, or communities participating in ritual obligations. The evidence remains incomplete and differs across regions, but one pattern is clear. Large stones required reliable organisation. Whether commanded by a state coordinated by religious authority or carried out by kin groups and local communities, the work depended on feeding people and keeping them together long enough for difficult tasks to be completed. Food was therefore part of the engineering. A worker who pulls stone all day needs calories. A large crew needs grain, meat, fish, beer, water, or whatever local systems can supply. Animals must be fed if they are used. Tools must be repaired. Sick and injured workers must be replaced. The larger the project, the more the monument depends on farms, herds, storage rooms, ovens, breweries, transport networks, and administrators or organisers capable of distributing supplies. The visible stone may be the final object, but behind it stands an entire economy of support. A pyramid block, a standing stone, or a colossal statue is also the shadow of bread, baked in huge quantities and carried to tired people before dawn. This support system leaves traces in unexpected places. Around major Egyptian building sites, archaeologists have found evidence of workers' settlements, bakeries, animal bones storage facilities, and administrative structures that complicate the old picture of anonymous misery. The workers were not simply bodies under a whip in the most simplistic sense. Many were organised into crews housed, fed, and identified within a system of state labour. This does not make the work easy or gentle, and it does not remove hierarchy, obligation, or suffering. It does show that monumental construction was managed with a sophistication that belongs as much to logistics as to architecture. The stone moved because society had been arranged to make it move. Rope made that arrangement visible. A thick rope stretched from a sledge gathers many hands into a single line of force. It turns separate bodies into a coordinated instrument. The quality of rope was critical. Weak rope could kill. Fibers had to be harvested, twisted, braided, inspected, and replaced. A rope pulling a heavy load was under constant stress, especially when the load resisted movement. If a rope failed suddenly, the release could throw workers backward or send a stone sliding. Ancient people who worked with large stones would have understood rope almost as a living material, something with limits, moods, and warning signs. The modern record rarely preserves it, but without rope, much of the megalithic world becomes difficult to imagine. Sledges were equally important because they turned a stone's underside into a controlled contact surface. A raw block dragged directly on earth could gouge, twist, and catch. A sledge spread weight and gave workers something designed to move. Its runners could be shaped, repaired, wetted, greased, or placed over wooden tracks. On sand, a sledge might move more efficiently when the surface ahead was dampened just enough to stiffen the grains and reduce resistance. This detail is small but revealing. Ancient knowledge did not need modern physics vocabulary to understand that some surfaces help and others fight. Workers learned by seeing when a load moved more easily when it sank and when the ground began to fail. Leadership was the invisible lever. Someone had to decide when to pull, when to stop, when to repair, when to adjust direction, when to rest, when to lighten the load, when to change the track, and when the risk had become too great. In a large operation, commands had to travel across a crowd. Signals may have been given through voice gesture, rhythm, drums, clappers, flags, or other methods now lost. What matters is synchronization. A megalith does not reward chaos. When the force of many people is applied at the wrong moment, the result is wasted effort or danger. When it is applied together, the stone begins to move, and for a few seconds the entire crew can feel the impossible becoming real beneath their hands. This psychological burden must have been intense. A giant stone in motion creates fear because it is never fully under control. It can crush a footpin, a worker slide downhill, turn unexpectedly, or break apart after weeks of effort. The people close to it would know its danger intimately. They would hear the creak of rope fibers, the groan of wood, the scrape of runners, the sudden hush when a block stopped moving. They would know that a successful day might advance the stone only a short distance. Progress could be measured in body lengths, not miles. And yet those small distances accumulated. A monument was built from days when nothing spectacular happened, except that the stone moved again. There is a lesser-known truth about such labour. The act of moving the stone may have created memory as powerful as the finished monument. A person who helped drag a great block could later point to it, and know that part of the body's strength remained there. Families might remember who worked on a route, who was injured, who led a crew, who brought food, who made the rope, who saw the stone rise. Even in societies with strict hierarchy, collective work could produce collective identity. The monument belonged to rulers or gods in one sense, but in another sense it belonged to everyone whose labour had been absorbed into it. This is why the idea of ancient builders as passive masses misses something essential. Many people involved in these projects were likely skilled at very specific tasks. Quarry workers understood stone, rope makers understood fibre, carpenters understood sledges and levers, path builders understood drainage slope and compaction, food suppliers understood volume and timing, supervisors understood people. The final movement of a huge stone depended on all these forms of knowledge converging. Strength was necessary, but strength without skill would have left more blocks abandoned, broken, or buried in failed roads. No single labour model explains the whole ancient world. The crews who moved Egyptian stone under a centralised state were not the same as the communities who raised Neolithic monuments in Europe, and neither was the same as the islanders who moved statues across Rapa Nui. Scholars still debate the balance between devotion, obligation, competition, coercion, and practical necessity in many places. But the common thread is clear. Heavy stone magnifies society. It reveals whether people can coordinate, whether they can store food, whether they can trust leadership, whether they can endure repetition, whether they can turn bodies into a force larger than any one life. The stone in this sense did not move because ancient people were stronger than people today. Their muscles were human muscles, their backs could break, their hands could blister, their patience could run out. The difference was that their societies sometimes chose to concentrate human effort with astonishing persistence. They built systems in which the work of many ordinary bodies could produce extraordinary results. The mountain moved not in defiance of nature, but through nature's own rules. Friction reduced force, multiplied weight, spread rhythm, controlled food converted into motion, and human will organized until the stone slowly and reluctantly began to slide. The route of a giant stone was never just an empty line between quarry and monument. It was a problem written across the land. Every slope, stream, hollow patch of mud ridge of hard ground, river bend, shoreline, forest edge, and seasonal change could either help the builders or stop them completely. A stone that had been freed from the quarry did not enter a neutral world. It entered a landscape with moods. Dry ground cracked. Wet ground swallowed. Sand resisted until it was treated properly. Ice could make a surface easier or more dangerous. Rivers could carry weight with almost effortless grace, but only after the stone reached the water, and only if boats, barges, banks, and currents could be controlled. Ancient builders did not move stones by ignoring landscape. They moved them by reading it. This is one of the most important differences between modern assumptions and ancient practice. Modern machinery can sometimes overpower terrain. Trucks, cranes, steel rails, reinforced roads and engines allow heavy loads to cross places that would once have been nearly impossible. Ancient builders had far less power to waste. They had to make the world cooperate. They looked for gentle gradients, stable ground, water access, seasonal windows, and natural corridors. They altered routes when necessary, but they also followed what the land permitted. A river valley could become a highway. A frozen marsh could become a temporary road. A flood season could bring boats close to quarries or building sites. A desert track could become workable only when prepared and maintained. The greatest tool was often not an object in a worker's hand, but the route itself. In Egypt, the Nile was more than a river flowing past monuments. It was the central transport system of a civilization. Stone quarried far from a building site could be dragged to the water, loaded onto boats or barges, and moved along the river with a force no human crew could match on land. This does not make the task easy. Loading and unloading a heavy block could be as dangerous as transport itself. Boats had to be strong enough, buoyant enough, and stable enough. The river had to be approached through prepared harbours, canals, ramps, or embankments. Timing mattered. A flood could help by raising water levels and bringing channels closer to working areas, but too much water could also destroy control. What survives in the record suggests that Egyptian stone transport was a sophisticated partnership between human planning and the river's annual rhythm. Water also changes the physics of moving stone on land. One famous ancient image shows a large statue being pulled on a sledge while a person appears to pour liquid before it. For a long time, this detail seemed almost ceremonial to some viewers. Experiments have since shown that adding the right amount of water to sand can reduce friction by making the sand firmer and less likely to pile up in front of the sledge. Too little water does little. Too much makes the surface unstable. The useful result lies in careful control, the sort of practical knowledge workers could have learned without equations. This small act, a person pouring water before a moving load, reveals a quiet genius. It shows that ancient builders did not merely apply force. They changed the behavior of the ground. Mud could be enemy or ally depending on its condition. Thick mud could trap a sledge so deeply that even a large team might fail to move it. But a prepared clay surface, wetted and compacted, could become smoother than loose soil. Wooden tracks could be laid across weak ground. Brush reeds, logs, gravel, or stone chips could help distribute weight. In some places, causeways may have been built not only as ceremonial approaches, but as practical routes for construction. A causeway is a statement, but it is also a solution rays prepared visible and stable. The line that later processions walk may first have carried stone. Seasonal cold offered another possible tool in certain regions. In northern landscapes, winter could harden ground that would be soft in summer. Frozen surfaces can support loads that would otherwise sink, and snow or ice can reduce friction. Scholars still debate where and how often ancient builders used winter transport, because direct evidence is difficult to preserve, but the idea fits a broader pattern. People who lived closely with seasonal change understood that the same landscape was not the same landscape all year. A marsh in spring, a dry track in late summer, and frozen ground in winter are three different engineering environments. Ancient planners did not need modern weather stations to know this. Their lives depended on such knowledge. Roads for moving heavy stones did not have to resemble modern roads. Some may have been temporary surfaces used only for a project then abandoned. Others became lasting routes. A stone road might be overbuilt for ordinary walking but essential for a sledge. A shallow incline could replace a steep shortcut. A route might curve widely to avoid a difficult descent. Workers could fill hollows, cut terraces, brace edges and maintain the path day after day as the load advanced. The road itself may have required more total labour than the movement of a single stone. This is easy to miss because a monument survives as a concentrated object, while a route is stretched thin across the land and slowly erased. Terrain could also dictate the shape of the monument tradition itself. In the Andes, builders worked in a world of mountains, ravines, earthquakes, and limited flat space. Stone did not move across gentle floodplains in the same way it did beside the Nile. Roads climbed, turned, narrowed, and crossed slopes where gravity was a constant threat. The Andean response was not to imitate Egypt, but to develop methods suited to highland conditions, careful, quarrying local stone use when possible, dragging and levering over prepared routes, and masonry that embraced irregular forms rather than forcing every block into identical geometry. The landscape did not merely challenge the builders, it shaped their style. On islands, the problem was different again. Rapa Nui had no great river system and no draft animals. Its famous statues moved across volcanic terrain in a resource-limited environment. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still debate the exact balance of methods used. But experimental work has shown that upright statues can be moved by rocking and guiding them with ropes, making them appear to walk in a controlled, swaying motion. This does not mean every statue moved this way, nor does it remove other methods from consideration. It does show that terrain and object design can work together. A statue's shape, center of gravity, root surface, rope control, and crew rhythm might create a method that looks strange only because modern observers expect wheels. In Britain, the movement of Stonehenge's stones forces attention onto a mixed landscape. The larger sarsens likely came from a closer source than the smaller bluestones, but the bluestones trace back to Western Wales, creating a transport puzzle over long distance. Some researchers argue for human transport across land and water. Others have explored the possibility that glacial movement brought some stones closer before humans selected them. The evidence remains debated, and no single explanation fully accounts for every detail. What matters here is that the problem cannot be solved in the abstract. It depends on rivers, coasts, ridges, valleys, ice age histories, and the choices of people who may have valued the stones precisely because they came from a distant and meaningful place. Sometimes the hardest part of a journey was not distance, but transition. Moving from quarry to road to river to bank to building site, or horizontal transport to vertical lifting, required changes in equipment and control. A block stable on a sledge might become dangerous when loaded onto a boat. A stone safe on water might be almost impossible to haul up from a muddy bank. Ancient transport systems had to manage these thresholds. Harbours, ramps, slipways, temporary embankments, and packed landing places may have been crucial, even if later erosion removed them. The invisible infrastructure of ancient stone moving was often located exactly where water met land. There is a quiet irony in all this. The stones seem to dominate the landscape today, but during construction the landscape dominated the stones. Builders could command labour, but they could not command a cliff to become gentle, or a river to flow uphill. They could only study, adapt, and wait. Waiting itself was part of the method. A crew might delay movement until the ground dried, until floods rose, until winter hardened the soil, until food stores were ready, until enough rope was prepared, until a route was repaired. Modern impatience makes waiting look like weakness. In ancient engineering, waiting could be wisdom. The route then was not a passive space. It was an active tool as important as lever or rope. Rivers carried what roads could not. Mud reduced or increased resistance depending on care. Ice opened brief possibilities. Causeways stabilized effort. Slopes were avoided, softened, or used. Stone moved because people learned not only how to apply force, but when and where force mattered most. The mountain did not travel through an empty world. It travelled through a landscape temporarily reorganized around its passage, and once it passed, the land slowly covered the traces, leaving later generations to stare at the finished monument and wonder how such weight ever crossed the earth at all. Moving a giant stone across the land was only one kind of victory. A block lying flat on a sledge even after a long and dangerous journey had not yet become what its builders imagined. It still belonged partly to the horizontal world of roads, ropes, and dragging tracks. To become a pillar, a lintel, an obelisk, a doorway, a wall course, or a sacred marker, it had to be raised, fitted, balanced, or placed above the ground with a precision that allowed no easy recovery from failure. Transport was exhausting, but lifting was unforgiving. A stone dragged badly could sometimes be pulled back into line. A stone raised badly could fall, crack, crush its supports, or bury workers beneath the very monument they were trying to create. The simplest way to lift a stone was not always to lift it in the modern sense. Ancient builders often avoided trying to hoist enormous weights straight into the air. Instead, they changed the shape of the ground around the problem. Earth is patient. It can be cut, piled, packed, and removed. A stone too heavy to raise vertically might be dragged up a ramp. A lintel could be pulled across an earthen incline until it reached the height of its supports. A standing stone could be tilted gradually into a prepared pit with earth ropes and levers controlling the movement. A platform could grow around a block as workers lifted it in stages, packing material beneath it each time. The final monument might seem to have been raised by a single dramatic act, But the real method may have been a slow negotiation between stone and soil. Ramps are among the most important and most debated tools in ancient construction. They are powerful because they replace vertical lifting with inclined movement, reducing the immediate force required. But ramps create problems of their own. They require material, labor, space maintenance, and careful design. A ramp too steep becomes useless or dangerous. A ramp too long consumes enormous resources. A ramp that is too narrow prevents workers from standing, pulling, or guiding the load properly. A ramp built of loose material can collapse under weight. When the building is finished, ramps are often dismantled or eroded, leaving behind only fragments or traces. This has made ancient lifting systems difficult to reconstruct, especially at sites where later construction or natural change has erased the temporary works. Levers turn small motions into large consequences. A wooden beam placed under the edge of a stone with a fulcrum beneath it could raise a weight slightly. That slight rise might allow workers to pack stones, wood, or earth underneath. Then the lever could be reset and the process repeated. This is not glamorous. It is slow, awkward, and physically demanding. Yet it has a quiet power. Many enormous objects can be lifted not by one impossible heave, but by hundreds of small lifts that never exceed the strength of the available tools. The ancient builder did not need to defeat gravity all at once. He needed only to win a finger's width, then preserve it, then win another. Counterweights may also have been used in some traditions, though the evidence differs by place and period. A counterweight does not remove weight, but it redistributes effort. A load can be balanced against another mass, allowing controlled movement with less direct force. Wooden frames, ropes, pivoting beams, and packed platforms could all be combined into temporary lifting systems. The problem is that these systems were made largely of perishable materials. Their absence from the ground does not mean they never existed, but neither should imagination fill every gap with elaborate machinery. Scholars still debate where simple wooden lifting devices were used, and where ramps and staged packing were more likely. The safest answer is often not one method, but a sequence of methods adapted to each stone. Raising an upright stone may have begun with a socket dug into the ground. The base of the stone could be slid toward the pit while ropes restrained the upper end. Workers might lift pull brace and pack earth behind it as the angle changed. At first, the stone would rise slowly. Near the end, the danger would increase because gravity would begin to help too much. A stone falling into its final vertical position could slam into the socket, shatter its base, or overshoot. Control was everything. Ropes on one side pulled, ropes on the other restrained. Levers adjusted. Earth cushioned and guided. People watched the angle with the attention of those who knew that one wrong movement could turn achievement into catastrophe. Lintels created another challenge. A lintel is a stone placed across supports, and its final position may be above head height. To set one in place, builders could raise the supports first, then build an earthen ramp up to them and drag the lintel across. After the lintel settled, the ramp could be removed, leaving what looks like a clean act of lifting. This method is often proposed for megalithic structures because it fits the logic of available tools. It also explains why the finished monument can seem more mysterious than the construction process actually was. The most important tool may have been the one deliberately erased at the end. Packed earth and rubble could serve as temporary scaffolding, especially for raising heavy blocks in stages. A stone could be levered slightly, packing placed beneath it, then levered again. Over time it would climb. This staged method reduces risk because the stone is rarely far above support. It also allows workers to correct position gradually. The trade-off is time. But time was often the resource ancient builders were most prepared to spend. Modern engineering often seeks speed because labour is expensive and schedules are strict. Ancient monumental projects could unfold over years, reigns, generations, or ritual cycles. Slow lifting was not failure. It was method. Precision mattered at the moment of setting. A stone in a wall must carry weight properly. A pillar must stand stable. A lintel must not crack under uneven pressure. A block in fine masonry must meet its neighbours without dangerous gaps. Builders used bedding surfaces, chocking stones, trimming abrasion and repeated adjustment. In some traditions, final fitting may have happened after the stone was nearly in place, with workers removing small high points until the mass settled correctly. The more irregular the stones, the more impressive this becomes. A rectangular block can be difficult enough. A polygonal block with many faces set against other irregular blocks demands a long conversation between measurement and touch. A surprising detail is that lifting often required lowering. To place a block accurately, workers sometimes had to overshoot slightly, support it, adjust the bedding, and then lower it into its final position. Lowering a heavy stone is its own form of control. Gravity is eager. The builders must be cautious. Wedges could be removed one at a time. Sand or small stones could be allowed to flow out beneath a load. Levers could ease pressure. Ropes could restrain motion. The final inch may have mattered more than the previous mile. A stone that had crossed valleys and rivers could still fail at the last contact point. The transformation from horizontal to vertical also changed the meaning of the stone. While it lay on the ground, it was an object under human control, however difficult. Once raised, it became a presence. It cast a shadow. It marked the horizon. It could be seen from far away. People could gather round it, bury the dead beneath it, align it with the ski-built walls from it, or place offerings near it. The engineering act became a social and sacred act at the same moment. The crowd that had strained to raise the stone may have watched it settle into place with a feeling that no later observer can fully recover. What survives in the record suggests that the moment of raising was not merely practical. It was likely remembered as the instant when labour became permanence. No single lifting method explains the world's megaliths. Some stones climbed ramps, some were levered, some were tilted into sockets. Some were set with packed platforms, some were raised by combinations of wood rope earth and human coordination now partly lost. The evidence remains incomplete because ancient builders removed the temporary works that made the permanent works possible. They left behind the stone, not the scaffold. They left behind the monument, not the exhausted road around it. And so the modern imagination sees a block high above the ground and leaps toward mystery. The real mystery is quieter and more impressive, not that ancient people ignored gravity, but that they understood it well enough to work with it slowly, dangerously, and with a patience that can make a mountain rise. In Egypt, stone became a language of eternity. The land itself encouraged that vision. On one side lay the river, a dark green ribbon of life moving through desert. Beyond the fields rose cliffs, plateaus, and dry valleys, where limestone, sandstone, granite, basalt, alabaster, and other stones could be cut from the earth. The Nile gave Egypt grain transport, rhythm, and political unity. The desert gave it preservation and monumentality. Between the two ancient builders developed one of the most famous traditions of heavy stone construction in history. A tradition so visible and so enduring that it has attracted both serious study and wild invention for centuries. The pyramids dominate the modern imagination, but they were part of a much wider world of stone. Egypt's builders quarried blocks for temples, tombs, causeways, valley complexes, statues, sarcophagi, obelisks, columns, walls, pavements, and shrines. Some stones were local. Others travelled far. Fine limestone might be brought from Tura. Granite came from Aswan, hundreds of miles to the south. Alabaster, basalt, quartzite, and sandstone each had their own sources and meanings. The stone chosen for a project was not merely a structural decision. It could reflect colour durability, sacred association, royal ambition, or the visual effect of sunlight across a finished surface. The Great Pyramid at Giza shows the scale of Egyptian organisation better than almost any single monument. Its blocks vary greatly in size, and the familiar image of identical cubes is misleading. Many core blocks were roughly shaped and laid in courses, while casing stones were cut and fitted with far greater care. The achievement was not only moving stone but managing sequence. A pyramid is a mountain made from decisions repeated thousands upon thousands of times. Quarry shape Hall place. Align, adjust, and continue upward. Each course changes the working surface. Each increase in height changes the transport problem. The structure grows while the construction system must grow with it. The old fantasy of mysterious levitation alien machines or vanished engines does not survive contact with the archaeological evidence. What survives instead is more human and more impressive. There are quarries near the pyramids, tool marks, workers' settlements, ramps, or ramp-like remains at some sites, administrative traces, tombs of officials and workers, and evidence of large-scale provisioning. The exact ramp systems used for the Great Pyramid remain debated because temporary structures were dismantled, reused, or eroded. Some scholars propose straight ramps, others zigzagging ramps, spiral ramps, internal ramps, or combinations of several methods. No single explanation fully accounts for every detail, especially at the highest levels. But the debate takes place within engineering, not magic. The question is not whether Egyptians could move stone. They clearly could. The question is exactly which sequence of practical methods they used at each stage. The Nile made the impossible less impossible. Heavy stones from distant quarries could be transported by water, especially when flood conditions improved access to channels and harbours. Recent archaeological finds, including papyri from Wadi al-Jarf, have helped illuminate the movement of materials during the reign of Khufu, including limestone transported by boat toward Giza. Such evidence does not solve every problem, but it pulls the pyramid out of the fog of legend and into a world of crews, deliveries, officials, records, and river logistics. The builders were not simply dragging blocks at random across desert. They were operating within a managed supply system. This is one of the great surprises of Egyptian monument building. The most powerful tool may have been administration. A rope can pull a stone, but administration ensures that the rope exists, that the crew is fed, that the quarry is active, that the boat is ready, that the landing place is prepared, and that the next block arrives before the previous team stands idle. The pyramid was not built by strength alone. It was built by scheduling. The dry grandeur of stone hides the softer but equally important reality of bread, beer, cattle, copper tools, wooden sledges, replacement crews, overseers, and scribes. In a civilization where the river set the rhythm of life, construction could be folded into cycles of taxation, labor duty, and state power. Obelisks reveal another side of Egyptian mastery. A pyramid block can be moved in many pieces. An obelisk is a single tall stone, and that changes everything. It must be quarried as one piece, transported without breaking, raised without cracking, and set upright with extreme care. Granite obelisks from Aswan demanded not only hard labour, but deep confidence in material knowledge. The unfinished obelisk still lying in its quarry shows both the ambition and the risk. Had it been completed, it would have been enormous, but a flaw in the stone ended the project. That abandonment is not an embarrassment. It is evidence of realistic decision-making. Egyptian builders knew when a stone had failed them. Raising an obelisk was one of the most dramatic acts in ancient engineering, though the exact details remain debated. Earthen ramps, sand-filled pits, controlled lowering ropes, and large crews may all have played roles. One plausible method involves dragging the obelisk up a ramp and then allowing its base to settle into a prepared socket, while sand or fill was gradually removed, controlling its descent toward vertical position. The evidence remains incomplete, and different obelisks may not all have been raised in the same way. What is clear is that Egyptian builders had a long tradition of handling tall monoliths, and they did so with a confidence that came from practice rather than fantasy. Colossal statues added still another challenge. A seated figure or standing royal image carved from a single block could weigh many tons, and had to preserve recognizable form. Unlike a rough building block, a statue could not be dragged carelessly without risking damage to its finished surfaces or symbolic features. Some statues may have been moved in partially finished form, then completed at the destination. Others were transported with protective material or careful support. The image of a giant statue on a sledge pulled by a large crew gives a rare glimpse into the coordination of labour. The statue is both object and ruler weight, and power stone and political theatre. Moving it publicly may have reinforced the authority it represented. Egyptian stonework also shows the importance of specialization. Quarry workers, boatmen, carpenters, rope makers, stone dressers, surveyors and scribes all belong to a larger system. Copper tools had to be supplied and repaired. Hammerstones had to be collected. Wood, never as abundant in Egypt as stone, had to be used carefully and sometimes imported. This scarcity of certain materials shaped methods. A civilization rich in stone but limited in large timber would not build like a forest culture. Its engineering solutions reflect what the land offered and what it withheld. The pyramids themselves were not isolated miracles. They grew from earlier tomb traditions, Mastaba's step pyramids, experiments in form, collapses, corrections, and changes in royal ideology. The step pyramid of Djoser marks a crucial transformation, turning stacked stone architecture into a new royal landscape. Later pyramids at Meidum Dashur and Giza show development, adaptation, and ambition. The bent pyramid with its change in angle is especially revealing because it suggests adjustment during construction, perhaps in response to structural concerns. Egyptian builders learned through experience. They did not emerge suddenly with perfect knowledge. They built, observed, corrected, and built again. What makes Egypt so important to the wider story of stone moving is not simply the weight of its monuments, but the clarity with which it reveals society behind stone. The state could gather labour from across the Nile Valley, it could feed crews, it could command quarries, it could move materials by river, it could preserve ideology in stone and then surround that stone with ritual meaning. The pharaoh's authority was not abstract when thousands of people were organised to build a tomb that reshaped the horizon. Power became visible as geometry, and yet even in Egypt uncertainty remains. The exact arrangement of ramps at Giza is still debated. The raising of the largest obelisks is reconstructed from partial evidence. The daily experience of most workers is known only through fragments. The balance between obligation, pride, coercion, skill, and religious purpose varied across time and place. The surviving monuments speak loudly but not completely. They tell us that the builders were organized, capable, observant, and daring. They do not preserve every hand signal, every accident, every argument over a cracked block, every exhausted body lying beside a work camp at sunset. The exaggerations around Egyptian monuments often come from refusing to accept that ordinary human systems can produce extraordinary results when they persist for long enough. A pyramid does not require lost superscience. It requires a society willing and able to turn landscape labour belief, river transport, administrative control craft skill, and royal ambition into a single project. That is not a smaller achievement. It is a larger one. It means the true engine was not hidden beneath the sand. It was the civilization itself arranged around stone until the desert horizon became a monument to organized human time. Far from the sunlit limestone of Egypt on the chalk downlands of southern Britain, another stone mystery rises from a very different world. Stonehenge does not overwhelm by height like a pyramid, nor does it dominate a city like a Roman platform. Its power is quieter, stranger, and more exposed. It stands under a wide sky surrounded by grass burial mounds, ancient earthworks, and the long memory of a landscape that had already been sacred before the great stones were raised. The monument seems simple at first: upright stones, horizontal lintels, a circular plane, and opening toward the horizon. But the closer it is studied, the more complicated it becomes. Stonehenge is not one monument built in one moment. It is a long sequence of choices made across centuries, and at the center of those choices lies one of the most haunting questions in prehistoric Europe. Why bring stones from so far away when other stone existed closer at hand? The larger stones at Stonehenge are Sarson's hard sandstone blocks, likely brought from the Marlborough Downs region roughly 20 miles away. Some are massive, weighing many tons, and the effort required to move shape rays and cap them with lintels was extraordinary. But the smaller bluestones create the deeper puzzle. Geological work has traced many of them to the Preseli Hills in western Wales, far from Salisbury Plain. Their journey, whether entirely by human transport or partly shaped by earlier glacial movement, before human selection, remains debated in detail. The evidence remains incomplete, and scholars still argue over exact routes, methods, and meanings. Yet what survives in the record suggests that distance itself may have mattered. The stones were not simply building material, they were pieces of another landscape carried into a new ceremonial world. Long before the familiar stone circle stood, the Stonehenge landscape had already been marked by activity. There were pits, posts, ditches, banks, cremation burials, and nearby monuments forming a ceremonial complex rather than a lone structure. This matters because Stonehenge was not an isolated engineering stunt. It belonged to a living geography of processions, burials, gatherings, alignments, feasting, and memory. The people who built it were farming communities with animals, crop seasonal rhythms, and social networks that reached across long distances. They did not leave written explanations, but their landscape shows repeated investment in places where the dead, the sky, and communal identity seem to have converged. The Sarsons alone would have tested any community. These stones were not soft blocks waiting conveniently beside the monument. They had to be selected, extracted, or gathered, shaped with stone tools, and moved across uneven ground. Their surfaces were dressed by pounding with hammer stones, creating forms more precise than many people realize. The uprights were shaped with slight tapering and carefully prepared joints. The lintels were fitted with mortise and tenon, and tongue and groove connections, details more often associated with woodworking than stone. This is a surprising and often overlooked feature. Stonehenge's builders appear to have translated timber construction logic into megalithic architecture. They were not simply standing rough rocks in a circle. They were building with stone as though it could become a permanent version of wood. That choice required both imagination and discipline. A lintel weighing several tons had to be raised above upright stones and seated correctly. The uprights themselves had to stand in prepared holes with packing stones around their bases. Earth ramps, timber frameworks, levers, ropes, and staged lifting methods have all been proposed. No single reconstruction can be proven in every detail because the temporary materials are gone. But the monument's surviving form shows that the builders controlled height, spacing, angle, and joinery with impressive accuracy. The circle may look rough from a distance weathered by time, but it is the remnant of careful design. The blue stones deepen the story because their smaller size does not make them easy. A stone weighing 2 or 3 tons is still a serious load, especially across long distance. The Preseli Hills are not near Stonehenge. Any human transport route would have required moving stones down from upland sources across land, possibly along rivers, perhaps around coastlines, then inland again toward Salisbury Plain. Each transition would have created risk. A stone could be lost in water, trapped in mud, broken on a slope, or abandoned because the route failed. The fact that blue stones arrived at all suggests either a long and carefully organized transport effort or a complex geological prehistory followed by human selection, or some combination still debated. What matters is that the stones were valued enough to be included, rearranged and preserved through changing designs. One of the lesser-known aspects of Stonehenge is that its stones were moved and rearranged over time. The monument was not frozen in its first form. Blue stones may have stood in earlier settings before being repositioned. The Great Sarsen Circle and Trilithons belong to a particular phase of construction, but earlier and later adjustments show continuing engagement. This makes the site feel less like a single finished object and more like a ceremonial organism altered by generations who inherited both its stones and its obligations. To move a stone once is difficult. To move it again suggests that its position mattered enough to justify renewed labour. The surrounding landscape strengthens this view. Nearby Durrington Walls, a large settlement and henge complex, has provided evidence of feasting and large gatherings. Animal bones suggest seasonal consumption on a significant scale, possibly involving people coming from different regions. This does not tell us exactly what Stonehenge meant, but it shows that the monument belonged to gatherings big enough to feed, organize and impress many people. The builders were not lonely mystics placing stones in silence. They were part of communities capable of mobilizing effort, celebrating competing mourning, and making statements through labor. The movement of stone may have been both work and event. The astronomical alignments at Stonehenge have attracted intense attention, especially the alignment toward the midsummer sunrise and midwinter sunset. The monument clearly engages with the sky, though scholars still debate the full range and meaning of its alignments. It is tempting to reduce Stonehenge to an ancient observatory, but that is probably too narrow. The sky mattered, but so did the dead, the land, the stone's origins, the gatherings around the monument, and the social memory of building. Ancient people rarely separated astronomy from ritual calendar ancestry and power in the way modern categories do. The turning sun may have given structure to ceremonies, but the stones also gave permanence to human relationships with time. Popular theories have often rushed into the gaps. Stonehenge has been credited to lost civilizations, wandering magicians, giants, and visitors from beyond Earth. Such claims survive because the monument sits in that powerful space between visibility and silence. It is clear enough to inspire awe, but mute enough to invite invention. Yet the archaeological evidence does not require impossible builders. It requires skilled prehistoric communities with strong reasons to gather, move, raise and revise. That answer may seem less dramatic at first, but it is far richer. It places the wonder back into human hands. Stonehenge also warns against assuming that utility is always obvious. The stones did not shelter a population like a house. They did not store grain. They did not defend a fortress. Their value was not practical in the narrow sense. And yet prehistoric people invested enormous labor into them. This means the monument answered needs that were social, sacred, ancestral, calendrical, political, or emotional. It made meaning visible across generations. A stone from Wales on Salisbury Plain may have been more than a stone. It may have been a carried memory, a claim of connection. a proof of alliance, a fragment of a distant sacred place brought into a new centre. In that sense, Stonehenge belongs perfectly within the wider story of ancient builders who moved stones like mountains. Its mystery is not merely how the stones moved, though that remains difficult and debated. Its deeper mystery is why a society without writing, without engines, and without metal cranes chose to spend so much collective energy making a monument whose full meaning could vanish while the stones remained. The builders solved enough of the physical problem to leave behind the spiritual one. They brought weight across distance, raised it into geometry, aligned it with the sky, and then disappeared into prehistory, leaving a circle that still feels unfinished because the final explanation has not survived. At Baalbek in the High Bekaa Valley of Lebanon, the stones seem to cross a threshold from monument into provocation. They do not merely look large. They look excessive, as if the builders were trying to test the upper limit of what dressed stone could become in architecture. The sanctuary that later Greeks and Romans knew as Heliopolis rose in a landscape already shaped by older sacred traditions, but the visible remains that most astonish modern visitors belong largely to the Roman imperial world. Columns tower over the site. Courtyards, podiums, stairways, and temple platforms speak of wealth, state power, and religious display. Yet beneath and around all this grandeur, attention is drawn again and again to the foundation stones, immense limestone blocks fitted into the platform with a confidence that still feels difficult to absorb. The most famous of these are often called the trilithon, three enormous stones, set in a row within the retaining wall of the great platform. Each block weighs hundreds of tons. Their presence has made Baalbek one of the most frequently misunderstood ancient sites in the world. Because the stones are so large, they have attracted claims about lost super-civilizations, giants, unknown machines, or forces beyond ordinary engineering. Such claims are not supported by the evidence, but they persist because the first sight of the stones creates a genuine problem for the imagination. Even when Roman authors, archaeology, quarry traces, and comparative engineering place the work within a human historical context, the blocks still seem to ask how far ancient ambition could really go. The answer begins with the quarry. Not far from the sanctuary lie even larger stones partly cut from the bedrock and never moved. One of them has long been known as the Stone of the Pregnant Woman, and nearby discoveries have revealed other immense unfinished blocks. These stones are crucial because they show that Baalbek's builders were not receiving finished blocks from nowhere. They were quarrying local limestone on a colossal scale. The source was close enough that the problem was not long-distance transport across mountains or seas, but short-distance movement of extraordinary weight. That matters. A block weighing hundreds of tons becomes more plausible when it must travel a relatively limited distance over a prepared route, though plausible does not mean easy. The problem remains severe. It simply belongs to engineering rather than fantasy. The unfinished blocks are also a warning. Ancient builders did not move every giant stone they imagined. Some were shaped and abandoned. Why they were left is still debated. A flaw in the stone, a change in plan, difficulty of extraction, impractical weight-shifting priorities, or some combination may explain them. No single explanation fully accounts for every abandoned block. But their presence proves that Baalbek was not the work of people for whom all weights were equally manageable. The quarry preserves the edge of ambition. It shows where the plan exceeded the final built reality, or where practical judgment ended a block's journey before it began. Like the unfinished obelisk at Aswan, the abandoned stones of Baalbek make the builders more human, not less impressive. Roman builders were deeply capable engineers. They moved obelisks from Egypt, built harbours, aqueducts, roads, amphitheatres, bridges, vaults, and temples across a vast empire. They understood lifting machines, capstans, pulleys, treadwheels, cranes, timber frameworks, ramps, sledges, rollers, and large-scale labour organisation. At Baalbek, the stones may have been moved by combining quarry planning, prepared roads, earthen ramps, sledges, rollers, or sliding systems, leverage and coordinated pulling. The exact method is not preserved in a complete ancient manual for this specific site, so scholars still debate details. But the Roman world had the technical culture needed to attempt such work, especially when a prestigious sanctuary justified exceptional expense. The choice to use such huge blocks may have been partly structural, but it was also visual and political. A platform made from enormous stones communicates permanence before any column rises above it. It tells the viewer that the sanctuary is not merely built on the earth, it has taken command of the earth. The stones form a foundation, but they also form a message. In the Roman imperial world, architecture often served as the authority made physical. Roads demonstrated control across distance. Aqueducts demonstrated command over water. Temples demonstrated the partnership of state religion and civic identity. At Baalbek, the platform stones demonstrated that Rome, or those building within Roman power, could impose order even on masses that seem nearly geological. Yet Baalbek is not simple, because its sacred history did not begin with Rome. The site had earlier significance, and the Roman sanctuary likely absorbed, transformed, and monumentalized older religious importance. In places like this, stone is layered not only physically but historically. One tradition builds over another, not necessarily erasing it completely. Sacred geography can survive beneath new names, new gods, new architecture, and new political systems. What survives in the record suggests continuity and transformation rather than a clean beginning. The enormous Roman work becomes part of a longer story in which certain places keep attracting reverence because of location memory power or inherited sanctity. The engineering problem of the trilithon is especially interesting because the stones are placed not high in the sky, but in a retaining wall. This can make them seem less dramatic than an obelisk raised upright, yet their mass is far greater than most stones lifted in ancient construction. Moving them into position required horizontal control and careful bedding. The builders had to bring the blocks from quarry to wall, align them with other courses, and set them so that they worked within the platform. A huge block is not useful if it sits poorly. Its weight must be supported evenly enough to avoid dangerous settling or cracking. Precision is harder when the stone is enormous, because small corrections demand massive effort. One practical possibility is that the builders use the advantage of elevation and earthworks. If a stone can be moved along a prepared path at or near the level where it will be set, the need for high lifting is reduced. Ancient engineers often preferred to bring the world up to the stone rather than lift the stone far above the world. Temporary ramps, embankments, and working platforms could have allowed blocks to be slid or hauled into place. Once the stone was positioned surrounding fill, and temporary works could be removed or buried within the construction. The clean exposed wall seen later would hide the messy practical landscape that made it possible. This pattern appears again and again in ancient stonework. Finished architecture encourages the illusion of sudden placement. Temporary architecture makes placement possible and then disappears. At Baalbek, the missing temporary systems leave room for speculation, but absence is not evidence for the impossible. Earth, wood, rope, and human or animal force leave fainter traces than limestone. They were not meant to endure. The stones were. The survival imbalance makes the hardest part of construction look more mysterious than it may have appeared to the people who actually managed it. Still, it would be a mistake to make Baalbek sound ordinary. It is not ordinary. Even within Roman engineering, these stones stand near an extreme. Most Roman buildings did not require blocks of such size. The choice to use them reflects either unusual ambition, unusual local conditions, unusual symbolic goals, or a combination of all three. The builders may have had convenient access to massive limestone beds close to the site, making large blocks tempting. They may have wanted a platform of exceptional strength and prestige. They may have inherited or expanded a sacred enclosure in ways that demanded monumental retaining walls. The evidence allows informed reconstruction, but not complete certainty. The popular fascination with Baalbek often comes from isolating the biggest stones from the rest of the site. A photograph of a single block can make it appear as though it has no context, no quarry, no roads, no Roman engineering tradition, no empire behind it. Reconnected to its world, the stone becomes less supernatural but more historically powerful. It belongs to a civilization that knew how to organize specialized labor move materials, build roads, command resources, and turn provincial sanctuaries into imperial statements. The block is not an orphan from a vanished age of giants. It is a product of a world where human institutions could become large enough to handle geological weight. The abandoned quarry stones remain the most haunting part of the story because they keep the site open-ended. They show that someone imagined even more. A stone was outlined, shaped and prepared, but it never reached the platform. It stayed in the earth, caught between intention and achievement. Modern visitors often treat it as proof of impossible mystery, but perhaps its deeper meaning is the opposite. It is proof that ancient builders also encountered the impossible and knew it when they saw it. They could move stones that seem unbelievable, but not every stone. They could master weight up to a point, then the earth answered back. Baalbek, therefore, sits at the edge of the ancient engineering imagination. It reveals a tradition capable of colossal success and colossal abandonment. It shows that Roman builders working within a sacred and political landscape could turn local limestone into an architecture of awe. It also shows that the boundary between possible and impossible was not fixed. It was tested block by block, quarry cut by quarry cut, root by root. Some stones crossed that boundary and became foundation. Others remained behind, still attached to the hillside or resting near it like mountains that refused the final command to move. In the Andes, stone had to answer to mountains. The builders who raised walls, terraces, temples, roads, and ceremonial spaces across this region did not work in a world of wide river plains or gentle transport corridors. They worked among steep slopes, high valleys, thin air, fractured bedrock, landslides, ravines, and earthquakes. The land itself seemed unfinished, rising sharply into the sky, and breaking into ridges where clouds dragged their shadows across stone faces. Here, moving heavy blocks was never only a question of weight. It was a question of altitude, balance, access, and survival. A stone could be close and still unreachable. A quarry could be visible from a building site and still separated from it by a descent that turned gravity into an enemy. The Inca are the most famous Andean stone builders, but they inherited and transformed older traditions. Long before the Inca Empire expanded across Western South America, earlier cultures had already learned to build with stone in difficult terrain. At Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, at Chavín de Huántar in the highlands of Peru, and at many less famous sites across the Andes, stone had been cut, moved, fitted, carved, and given sacred importance. The Inca entered a world where stone already carried deep authority. What made them extraordinary was not that they invented Andean masonry from nothing, but that they brought older knowledge into an imperial system of roads, labor organization, state ritual, and political control stretching across mountains and deserts. Their best-known walls appear almost alive. At places such as Cusco Sacsayhuaman, Ollantaytambo, and Machu Picchu, stones fit together without mortar, their irregular faces meeting in tight, complex joints. Some blocks are enormous, others are smaller, but shaped with such precision that the whole wall seems less assembled than grown. Unlike the rectangular blocks of many Mediterranean traditions, Andean masonry often embraces polygonal form. A single stone may have many sides, each worked to meet its neighbours. This was not decorative excess. In earthquake country, tightly fitted stones with irregular joints could move slightly and settle without collapsing as easily as rigid mortar-bound walls. The evidence suggests practical wisdom shaped by a restless earth. The lack of mortar is sometimes misunderstood as a mystery in itself, as though mortar were the obvious mark of advancement, and its absence must imply secret methods. In the Andes, the opposite may be closer to the truth. Mortar can become a weakness when the ground shakes. Stones that interlock closely, each one shaped to distribute pressure through many contact points, can form a flexible mass. This does not make the walls indestructible, and not all Andean stonework reach the same level of refinement, but the finest examples reveal builders who understood their environment with remarkable sensitivity. They were not trying to copy another civilization's idea of stone architecture. They were solving Andean problems in an Andean way. Moving the blocks required a different kind of organization from Egypt or Rome. The Inca did not use wheeled transport for construction in the practical sense, and the mountainous terrain would have made heavy wheeled vehicles difficult, even if the concept had been widely applied. They also lacked the large draft animals used in parts of Eurasia. Llamas could carry goods, but they could not haul giant stones like oxen. Human labour remained central. The empire organised that labour through systems of obligation, often described through the concept of mitta, in which communities provided work for state projects. This labour built roads, terraces, storehouses, temples, and royal estates. It also moved stone. A stone in the Andes might be dragged on a prepared path rocked forward with ropes levered over uneven ground, or moved along ramps and terraces built specifically for construction. Wooden rollers may have been limited by terrain and timber availability, though wood rope and fibre were certainly used in many practical ways. In some places, stones were quarried relatively near their final location, reducing transport distance while still leaving serious challenges. At Ollantaytambo, large stones were quarried from mountains across the valley and transported to a ceremonial complex requiring descent river crossing or route management near water and ascent. The journey of these stones shows that even when the distance was not vast by map, the landscape could make it formidable. The ramps and routes used for Andean stones were not always grand roads visible forever. Some were temporary tracks or construction approaches that later eroded, were buried, or became part of agricultural terraces and paths. The builders may have used retaining walls to stabilize slopes-filled depressions and created gradual inclines where direct routes were too dangerous. A large stone descending a slope is not merely heavy, it is a stored disaster. Ropes must restrain it as much as pull it. Workers below it risk death if control fails. On steep land, gravity is not just resistance to be overcome. It is a force that can suddenly become too helpful. The precision of Andean fitting also depended on repeated trial. A block could be shaped near its final place, tested against its neighbours, marked removed, trimmed and tested again. Since the Inca did not leave written engineering manuals, the exact details of this process remain debated. Some researchers have proposed that builders used templates, marking systems, abrasion hammer stones and patient adjustment. What survives in the walls suggests an extraordinary investment of skilled labour. The joints are not the result of casual stacking. They are the result of many small corrections, each one turning rough stone into a fitted member of a larger structure. A lesser-known detail is that not all Inca stonework was finished to the same standard. The most famous walls represent elite ceremonial, royal, or highly visible spaces. Elsewhere, masonry could be rougher, more functional, or built with smaller stones. This variation matters because it shows choice. The finest work was not simply the only way the Inca knew how to build. It was a deliberate investment reserved for places where power, sacredness, durability, and display demanded it. A finely fitted wall in Cusco was not only strong, it was imperial language. It told conquered peoples and visiting elites that the state could organize human skill so completely that even stone appeared obedient. At Sacsayhuaman above Cusco, the great zigzag walls intensify that message. Some stones weigh many tons, and their irregular forms are fitted into a defensive and ceremonial complex, whose full meaning is still debated. The walls follow the ridge with a kind of monumental rhythm, rising and turning in massive courses. Their scale has inspired many unsupported theories, but the evidence points toward Inca labor organization, local geology, and long-established Andean stone knowledge rather than lost machines. The wonder is not diminished by that. In fact, it grows stronger because the stones were handled in a world without engines, without steel cranes, without draft animals suitable for the task, and without the wide flat spaces that make transport easier. Machu Picchu reveals another side of Andean stone mastery. Its stones are not the largest in the Andes, but the entire site is an act of building with a mountain rather than merely on it. Terraces stabilize slopes, walls step with the land, water channels guide springs and rainfall. Structures are oriented to ridges, sacred peaks, and celestial events in ways scholars continue to study. The stonework there shows that Andean builders were not only movers of weight, but readers of place. They used stone to bind architecture to mountain water, agriculture, ritual, and royal presence. The landscape was not background. It was part of the design. This relationship between stone and sacred geography is crucial. Mountains in Andean thought were not inert piles of rock. They could be powerful presences, sources of water, weather, fertility, and identity. To build with stone in such a world was not merely to exploit material. It was to work within a living sacred landscape. A block taken from a quarry could carry the force of its origin. A wall could connect a ruler to a mountain. A carved stone could mark a place where earth, water, ancestors, and sky converged. What survives in the record suggests that engineering, politics, and cosmology were tightly woven together. The Spanish conquest shattered much of the Inca world, but it also unintentionally preserved the astonishment of outsiders encountering Andean masonry. Colonial buildings were raised on Inca foundations in Cusco, and earthquakes later damaged many colonial structures while the Inca stone bases remained standing. This contrast became part of the modern legend of Inca engineering. It should not be exaggerated into invincibility, but it does reveal something real. The builders understood the ground beneath them. The walls were not only beautiful, they were adapted to motion. Andean stonework therefore adds a new answer to the larger mystery of ancient builders. Not every society tried to move the largest possible stone over the longest possible distance. Some mastered the harder art of making difficult stones belong exactly where they were placed. In the Andes, the mountain was not defeated. It was negotiated with. Blocks were dragged, levered, shaped, fitted and locked into walls that could breathe with earthquakes and speak with imperial authority. The stones did not float into place, and no lost magic is needed. They arrive through organized labor, inherited skill, and an intimate knowledge of terrain. Yet even after all explanations are offered, the walls still keep something of their silence. Their joints are too tight, their forms too patient, their setting too dramatic to feel ordinary. They remain as proof that ancient builders could look at a mountain world and decide not only to survive within it, but to carve permanence directly into its bones. On Rapa Nui, far out in the southeastern Pacific, the stone faces look toward a horizon that makes the rest of the world feel impossibly distant. The island is small, volcanic, and isolated, a triangle of land surrounded by thousands of miles of ocean. There are no rivers broad enough to carry monuments. There are no draft animals. There are no metal cranes. There are no mountain ranges feeding endless forests of timber. Yet across this island, hundreds of great statues were carved, moved, raised, and placed on ceremonial platforms, many with their backs to the sea, and their faces turned inland toward the communities they once watched. The moai are not the largest stones humans ever moved, but few monuments reveal so clearly how engineering, belief rivalry, resource pressure, and isolation can become bound together in stone. The people who made the moai were Polynesian voyagers, and their descendants part of one of the greatest oceanic migration stories in human history. They reached Rapa Nui by canoe across a sea so vast that the act of arrival itself deserves awe. Once there, they built a society from limited materials, volcanic soils, coastal resources, cultivated fields, stone gardens, and social systems adapted to an island that could not be easily resupplied from elsewhere. In such a place, stone took on special power. Wood was valuable and vulnerable. Soil could erode, crops could fail. But volcanic tough basalt and scoria could hold memory after generations passed. The moai emerged from this island world as images of ancestral presence, political authority and lineage identity, though the exact meanings and changes over time remain debated. Most moai were carved from the volcanic tuff of Rano Raraku, a crater that became both quarry and sacred landscape. The mountain is still filled with statues in every stage of creation. Some lie on their backs, partly attached to the bedrock. Some stand buried to their shoulders on the slopes, their bodies hidden beneath accumulated soil. Some appear almost ready to leave. Others are unfinished, including figures larger than most ever transported. Rano Raraku is one of the great unfinished workshops of the ancient world, like Aswan or Baalbek in a very different setting. It shows process, not only result. The statues did not appear fully formed on platforms. They were born from the crater, carved in place, detached, lowered, moved, and eventually raised elsewhere if the journey succeeded. The carving process itself required a deep knowledge of the stone. Volcanic tuff is softer than granite and easier to shape, but a statue several meters tall remains fragile in certain ways. A worker could not simply hack without thought. The form had to be planned while still attached to the slope. The face, long nose, heavy brow, ears, torso and hands were shaped with stone tools, especially harder basalt picks. The back was freed last. The statue's body was not fully finished in every detail at the quarry. Some features may have been refined after transport. This balance between enough shaping and too much vulnerability is familiar from other megalithic traditions. Every unnecessary mass made transport harder, but every finished surface became something that could be damaged on the road. How the moai moved has been one of the most debated questions in archaeology. Older theories emphasize sledges, rollers, and heavy timber, sometimes linking statue transport directly to deforestation and ecological collapse. More recent experimental archaeology has shown that upright statues can be moved by rocking them side to side with ropes, making them walk in a controlled motion. This method is especially intriguing because oral traditions on the island remembered that the statues walked. Though such traditions must be handled carefully and not treated as simple engineering manuals. The walking method does not prove that every moai moved this way, and scholars still debate the full range of techniques used. But it demonstrates that the statue's shape, with a forward-leaning posture and suitable centre of gravity, could have supported a transport system very different from dragging a rectangular block across a plain. The image's striking teams with ropes guide the statue upright, rocking it gently from side to side, shifting it forward in small steps. The movement is slow, risky, and strangely lifelike. Too much pull and the statue falls. Too little control and it twists. The ground must be prepared enough to avoid disaster, but the method requires far less timber than a huge sledge system. It also transforms transport into a public event that fits the symbolism of ancestral figures arriving at their platforms. No single explanation fully accounts for every moai, especially the largest examples and the unfinished giants that never left the quarry, but the walking experiments have changed the conversation. They show that what once seemed impossible may have been possible through balance, rhythm, rope and design. The roads of Rapa Nui add another layer. Ancient statue roads radiate from Rano Raraku and fallen moai along some routes suggest accidents or abandonment during transport. Their positions have been interpreted in different ways, and the evidence remains incomplete, but they make one fact-clear movement across the island was systematic enough to leave a pattern. The statues did not drift randomly from quarry to platform. They followed routes shaped by terrain, social geography, and the locations of ceremonial centres. Every successful journey carried a piece of the quarry outward, distributing ancestral authority across the island. The moai stood on Ahu stone platforms that were themselves major constructions. Some Ahu incorporated carefully fitted stones ramps retaining walls and burial or ceremonial elements. The statue was the visible face of a larger architectural and social system. In many cases, the moai looked inland, not out to sea, as if watching over the communities connected to them. Later, some were topped with red scoria cylinders known as pukao, often described as top knots, or hair forms quarried from a different source at Punapau. These pukao added another transport problem. Separate heavy stones differently shaped moved from another quarry and raised onto statues already standing. Their presence reveals not a society barely able to move one kind of stone, but one willing to complicate the task for added meaning and display. A lesser-known detail is that the islanders also engineered the land for farming. Stone mulch gardens, rock alignments, and lithic mulching helped retain moisture, moderate soil temperature, reduce erosion, and improve cultivation in a difficult environment. This matters because it challenges the idea of a society obsessed only with statues while blindly destroying itself. Rapa Nui's history was complex. Deforestation introduced rat soil pressure, social competition, climate variation, European contact disease, slave raiding, and later colonial disruption all played roles in the island's tragedy. The old simplified story of people cutting down every tree merely to move statues is no longer adequate. Scholars still debate the timing and causes of social change, but the evidence points to resilience and adaptation, as well as stress. The toppling of the moai marks a later and darker transformation. By the time Europeans arrived, and in the generations that followed, many statues were eventually found fallen from their platforms. The reasons are debated and likely tied to internal conflict, changing religious authority, social upheaval, and the devastating effects of outside contact. A statue that once embodied ancestral power could become a target when that power was contested. In this way, the moai show that stone permanence is not the same as social permanence. A monument can survive while its meaning is overturned. Rapa Nui therefore gives the wider story of ancient stone moving a sharper emotional edge. Here the builders were not backed by a river empire like Egypt, or a vast imperial road system like Rome. They worked within the limits of a remote island, and those limits shaped everything. The statues were carved from a single volcanic source, moved through a constrained landscape raised on platforms tied to kinship and authority, and later caught in the collapse or transformation of the world that had made them meaningful. Their achievement was not only that they moved stone, it was that they made stone walk across one of the most isolated human worlds on Earth. The island also warns against easy judgment. It is tempting to look at fallen statues and imagine a simple moral tale of excess, but ancient lives rarely fit such neat lessons. The people of Rapa Nui were navigators, farmers, carvers, organizers, and survivors under conditions most societies never faced. Their monuments express ambition, devotion, rivalry, memory, and ingenuity. They also carry the shadow of vulnerability. When resources are limited and social demands grow heavy, even sacred stone can become part of a dangerous balance. The moai stand fall and rise again in modern restoration, as reminders that human beings have always tried to make ancestors visible, to bind community to landscape, and to push material limits for meanings that outsiders may only partly understand. In the end, Rapa Nui's statues do not solve the mystery of megaliths by offering one universal method. They expand it. They show that ancient builders could design stones for motion, not merely force motion upon them. They show that isolation did not prevent innovation. They show that monuments can be at once engineering achievements and social risks. And as the faces of the moai continue to watch the island's windswept ground, they preserve one of the most unforgettable images in the history of heavy stone ancestors carved from a volcano moving slowly across the land as if the mountain itself had learned to walk. Wherever giant stones survive, myths gather around them. This is almost inevitable. A stone weighing more than a house standing in a field fitted into a wall or lying unfinished in a quarry creates a gap between what the eye sees and what the mind can easily accept. That gap is fertile ground. It fills with giants, magicians, levitation, vanished races, secret sciences, sound waves, alien visitors, and forgotten civilizations more powerful than anything recorded in history. The stories differ from place to place, but the pattern is remarkably consistent. When later people cannot imagine the labor system tools, patience, and social world that produced a monument, they often imagine a different kind of builder. This does not happen only in modern times. Ancient and medieval observers also explained older monuments through legend. Stones were said to have been placed by heroes, gods, demons, or giants because they already seemed too large for ordinary people. At some sites, folklore turned megaliths into petrified dancers, frozen armies, punished beings, or remnants of battles between supernatural forces. Such tales are valuable as cultural history, but they are not engineering evidence. They show how communities make meaning around ruins they did not build or no longer understand. A monument can outlive the memory of its makers so completely that later generations must invent a new origin simply to live with its presence. Modern fringe theories often continue this old habit in technological clothing. Instead of giants, they offer lost machines. Instead of spirits, they offer anti-gravity. Instead of divine builders, they offer aliens. The language changes, but the emotional structure remains similar. The builders known to archaeology are judged insufficient, and another more extraordinary agent is introduced to carry the weight. These ideas can be entertaining, and some have become powerful in popular culture, but they usually rest on a misunderstanding of both ancient ability and archaeological evidence. They treat the absence of surviving ropes, ramps, wooden frameworks, and labor records as proof that such things could not have existed, when in reality those are exactly the materials most likely to disappear. One reason these theories persist is that they offer a simple answer to a complex problem. Ancient stone moving was not a single trick. It was quarrying, route preparation, labor organization, food supply, rope making, sledge design, surface treatment, seasonal timing, lifting, fitting, ritual motivation, and political authority. It involved many small solutions repeated over long periods. A lost technology story is cleaner. It compresses all that complexity into one hidden device or forgotten secret. The problem is that archaeology rarely supports such compression. At site after site, the evidence points not to one miracle, but to systems of work: quarries, tool marks, unfinished stones, roads, camps, ramps, experiments and failures. The myth of levitation is especially persistent because it seems to answer the hardest part of the problem. If stones floated, there would be no need for roads, sledges, ropes, or hundreds of workers. Some popular claims suggest that ancient people used sound to lift stones, citing scattered legends or misunderstood accounts. There is no credible archaeological evidence that giant megaliths were levitated by sound or any lost acoustic technology. Ancient people certainly used sound in ritual coordination and ceremony. Work songs, rhythmic commands, drums, chants, and signals may have helped synchronize labor. But coordination is not levitation. A rhythm that helps people pull together is a powerful tool, though not a supernatural one. The idea of giants also survives because it gives the stones a human-like maker scaled up to the problem. If the block is too big, the builder must have been bigger. Many cultures told stories of giants because large bones, strange ruins, and dramatic landscapes invited such explanations. In reality, the megalithic record does not require giant bodies. It requires organized bodies. Human beings of ordinary size working with ropes, levers, ramps, sledges, and planning can accomplish feats that look impossible when imagined as individual effort. The mistake is to picture one person lifting. Ancient builders rarely worked that way. Their strength lay in multiplication. Claims of vanished super-civilizations are more complicated because they sometimes begin with real mysteries. There are genuine uncertainties in ancient engineering. Scholars still debate the exact transport routes of some stones, the precise ramp systems of certain pyramids, the full meaning of Stonehenge, the detailed lifting methods of obelisks, and the social organization behind early monuments. The evidence remains incomplete, but uncertainty is not a blank space into which any explanation fits equally well. A responsible reconstruction must connect to known materials, dates tools, landscapes, and cultural contexts. A theory that requires an advanced global civilization but leaves no clear settlement pattern, no tools, no waste, no writing, no transitional technologies, and no consistent archaeological footprint explains one mystery by creating a much larger one. There is also a quieter problem. Beneath many fringe claims, they often underestimate the people who actually built the monuments. When pyramids, Andean walls, moai or megalithic circles are credited to outsiders or lost masters, the known cultures are pushed aside. Their labor becomes invisible again. This is especially harmful when the builders were indigenous or non-European societies whose achievements have long been dismissed. To say that ancient Egyptians, Andean peoples, Polynesians, Neolithic farmers or Roman engineers could not have built what archaeology shows them. Building is not humility before mystery. It is often a failure to recognize human ingenuity in forms different from modern industry. None of this means the monuments are fully explained in every detail. The opposite is true. Their real history is full of unresolved problems. How exactly were some of the largest stones maneuvered through tight spaces? Which ramp designs were used at different phases of pyramid construction? How were specific obelisks raised without cracking? What social rituals accompanied long-distance bluestone transport? How did workers at certain sites communicate across huge crews? Why were some stones abandoned after so much effort? These are serious questions, and serious questions do not need fantasy to remain compelling. The unknown is already deep enough. Experimental archaeology has helped close some gaps without pretending to close all of them. Researchers and builders have moved heavy stones using sledges, rollers, ropes, ramps, levers, wet sand, wooden tracks, and coordinated crews. Experiments with Moai movement have shown how an upright statue can be rocked forward. Tests with Stonehenge-like blocks have shown that surprisingly small teams can move multi-ton stones under the right conditions, though experiments are never perfect replicas of ancient reality. They simplify some variables and cannot recreate vanished belief systems' full labour organisation or long-term construction pressures. Still, they demonstrate a crucial point. Many ancient feats that seem impossible in the imagination become difficult but plausible when broken into practical steps. The most misleading word in this whole subject may be primitive. It suggests people lacking thought skill or sophistication simply because their tools were made of stone, wood, fibre, copper, or earth. But a society can be technologically simple in material terms and highly sophisticated in practice. A rope made from plant fibre can be engineered through generations of knowledge. A road of packed earth can be designed for a specific load. A quarry worker with a hammerstone can understand fracture better than a modern observer with a camera. A surveyor using cords and sightlines can align a monument with remarkable care. The absence of engines is not the absence of engineering. Another reason myths persist is that modern people often mistake speed for intelligence. If a task would be absurdly slow today without machinery, it is assumed ancient people must have had machinery. But ancient monumental projects were not always governed by the same sense of time. A year of labour, a decade of preparation, or a multi-generational effort could be meaningful if the result anchored royal power, ancestor worship, social identity, or sacred geography. Slow methods are not weak methods when a society is willing to sustain them. The builders were not looking for the fastest possible solution. They were looking for a workable solution within their world. The myths around heavy stones therefore reveal as much about modern imagination as about ancient history. The modern world is surrounded by machines, so it sees machine-shaped absences everywhere. It expects engines behind effort, steel behind height, and industrial precision behind large-scale order. Ancient monuments disrupt that expectation. They show that human communities organized under different beliefs and constraints could achieve permanence without modern power. That is difficult to accept because it forces a broader view of intelligence. It asks the observer to admire not only invention but coordination, not only tools but patience, not only machines but society itself as a machine of memory. In the end, the unsupported theories are not necessary. The stones do not need aliens to become astonishing. They do not need giants to become grand. They do not need levitation to become mysterious. Their true builders were stranger and more interesting than any fantasy, because they were human beings working at the limit of their material world. They failed, learned, organized, suffered, celebrated, and tried again. They left behind quarries where ambition cracked roads, where effort vanished into dust walls, where precision still holds, and monuments whose silence invites wonder without surrendering to invention. The real story does not remove the mystery from the stones. It gives the mystery back its human weight. The deeper question is not only how ancient builders moved stones like mountains, but why they ever chose to do it. A society that cuts a huge block from bedrock, drags it across a landscape, raises it into place, and returns to it generation after generation is doing more than solving an engineering problem. It is making a claim. It is saying that something matters enough to exhaust bodies, redirect food, organize specialists, risk death, and reshape the visible world. Heavy stone was never neutral. Its weight was part of its meaning. The harder it was to move, the more powerful the final presence became. Human beings have always lived against disappearance. Bodies decay, houses burn or rot, wood collapses, cloth fades, Spoken names vanish when no one remains to speak them. Even memory, which feels strong inside a living mind, can become fragile after only a few generations. Stone offered a different bargain. It could outlast the builder, the family, the ruler, the harvest, even the language used to name it. This did not make stone eternal in the absolute sense. Earthquakes, erosion, conquest, reuse, and time could still break it. But compared with the human life around it, stone seemed almost outside ordinary decay. To move a giant stone was to borrow some of that endurance and place it in human service. This is why tombs, ancestor monuments, and sacred markers appear so often in the story of megalithic construction. The dead were not simply gone in many ancient societies. They remained powerful, dangerous, protective, or necessary. A burial chamber built from slabs could make the presence of ancestors durable. A statue could hold the authority of a lineage. A pyramid could turn a royal death into a cosmic event. A standing stone could mark a place where the living returned to remember those who had become part of the land. What survives in the record suggests that stone often helped stabilize relationships between the living and the dead, though the exact beliefs varied enormously and are often only partly recoverable. Power also found a natural ally in stone. A ruler who could command grain might feed a court. A ruler who could command soldiers might win a battle, but a ruler who could command stone on a monumental scale could make authority visible after the voice of command fell silent. The monument became proof that labour had obeyed. It showed that a social order was capable of organising bodies beyond household needs. It transformed hierarchy into landscape. In Egypt, royal power rose into pyramids and obelisks. In Rome, imperial ambition took form in platforms, temples, roads, and cities. In the Andes, Inca walls made conquest feel geological, as if the empire itself had become part of the mountains. The stone did not merely symbolize power, it demonstrated that power had already acted. Yet not all megaliths were royal. Many belonged to communities without kings in the later imperial sense. This makes their purpose even more intriguing. In such cases, moving heavy stone may have created unity among groups that needed to cooperate, compete, marry, trade, and negotiate identity. A monument could become a shared centre where scattered people gathered. The work itself could bind them. Pulling a stone, feeding a crew, building a tomb, or raising a pillar created memories of collective effort. The final structure then preserved those memories in a form that outlasted the event. No single explanation fully accounts for all early monuments, but in many landscapes stone seems to have helped turn temporary gatherings into lasting belonging. Competition may have played a role as well. Human societies rarely build only from calm devotion. They also build from rivalry, prestige, fear of being forgotten, and the desire to surpass neighbours or ancestors. Once one community raises a stone, another may raise a larger one. Once one ruler builds a platform, a successor may expand it. Once one lineage places statues along the coast, another may demand more taller or finer figures. This does not reduce monuments to vanity. Competition can coexist with belief. A sacred monument can still be a political statement. A tomb can honour the dead while elevating the living family. A temple can serve gods while displaying the wealth of patrons. Heavy stone is especially suited to such layered meanings because its difficulty cannot be faked. Astronomy added another dimension. Many ancient monuments engage with the sky, though not always in ways that can be simplified into modern observatories. Solstice, sunrise, midwinter, sunset, lunar cycles, stellar risings, horizon notches, and seasonal light effects may have mattered at different sites. The sky gave structure to agricultural, time ritual gatherings, royal ceremonies, navigation, and mythic order. To align stone with the heavens was to join the most durable material underfoot with the great recurring motions overhead. Scholars still debate the exact intentions behind many alignments, and accidental or overinterpreted patterns must be treated cautiously. But in some cases, the relationship between monument and sky is difficult to dismiss. Stone made time visible. The act of building could also transform ordinary landscape into sacred geography. A hill spring cave, riverbend quarry, or horizon, already meaningful to a community, could be intensified through stone. The monument did not create significance from nothing. Often it anchored significance already present. A stone brought from a distant mountain could carry that mountain's identity into a new place. A block taken from a sacred quarry could bind the monument to its source. A platform on an island could connect ancestors to a living village. A wall in the Andes could tie a ruler to a mountain spirit. The physical journey of stone may therefore have mirrored a spiritual or political journey. The block moved through space because meaning needed to move with it. There is also the simple human desire to make the invisible visible. Belief has no weight by itself. Authority has no shape unless given one. Memory cannot be seen unless marked. A community's identity exists in stories, rituals, kinship, and shared experience, but these are fragile. Stone gives them a body. A monument says that the unseen order of the world has taken form here. It gives people a place to gather, a surface to touch, a shadow to watch, a direction to face. In this way, engineering and imagination become inseparable. The stone stands because people found a reason to make meaning heavy. One lesser known but important detail is that monuments often required maintenance, reinterpretation, and renewal. The idea that ancient builders made a structure and then simply walked away is often wrong. Stones were rearranged, platforms, expanded surfaces, recarved tombs, reopened temples, rebuilt statues, toppled and sometimes restored sacred roots reused, and older places absorbed into newer systems of belief. A monument could remain important precisely because later generations kept changing its meaning. Stone preserved the past, but it did not freeze it. It became a stage on which new societies argued with old ones. This helps explain why some monuments outlast the civilizations that built them, but do not outlast interpretation. When the original builders disappear later, people may still use the site, fear it, quarry it, worship at it, avoid it, build over it, or invent stories about it. The stone remains active in human imagination. Baalbek became layered with successive sacred and political meanings. Stonehenge became a puzzle for people who no longer remembered its makers. Egyptian monuments were admired, reused, robbed, studied, mythologized, and absorbed into later worlds. Inca foundations carried colonial buildings after conquest, silently holding up a new order that had tried to dominate the old. The builder's intention is only the first life of a monument. The decision to build the impossible may therefore have come from several forces acting together. Belief gave the project depth, power gave it command, community gave it labor, competition gave it urgency, landscape gave it place, the dead gave it memory, the sky gave it rhythm, materials gave it resistance. None of these alone explains every site, but together they show why ancient people might choose a task that seems irrational from a purely practical viewpoint. A giant stone is costly because cost is part of the message. The monument proves devotion by demanding sacrifice. It proves authority by organizing effort. It proves memory by surviving those who made it. Modern people sometimes separate practical and symbolic explanations as if one must defeat the other. In ancient stone building, they usually belong together. A ramp could be practical and sacred. A quarry could be a work site and a holy place. A procession moving a stone could be transport and ritual at once. Feeding workers could be logistics and ceremony. The raising of a pillar could be engineering and cosmology in the same breath. Ancient societies did not necessarily divide the world into categories that modern analysis prefers. Their monuments asked to be understood as physical, social, political, and spiritual acts all at once. That is why the stones still feel powerful even after their original meanings have thinned. A viewer may not know the name of the ruler, the song of the workers, the prayer at the raising, or the calendar date of the first ceremony. But the weight remains legible. The difficulty remains visible. Anyone standing before a huge stone can understand that it demanded more than casual effort. That understanding crosses time. It does not reveal every belief, but it communicates seriousness. The ancient builders made meaning durable by making it heavy enough that no later generation could easily ignore it. So the answer to why they built the impossible is not simple. They built because death needed memory power, needed display communities, needed centers, calendars, needed markers, sacred places, needed bodies, and ambition needed proof. They built because the human world is brief, and stone appears patient. They built because moving a mountain or even a fragment of one allowed them to say that their gods, ancestors, rulers and communities mattered beyond the passing day. The stones were not only burdens carried across land, they were arguments made against time. What the stones still refuse is total explanation. They allow measurement, mapping, dating, comparison, experiment and reconstruction, but they do not surrender the whole human scene that made them possible. A quarry can show where a block was cut, but not the exact thought of the person who chose it. A road can suggest the direction of movement, but not the fear in the crew when the stone began to slide. A wall can prove extraordinary fitting, but not the years of apprenticeship hidden in each joint. A fallen statue can show failure or conflict, but not the last ceremony performed before it toppled. The record is generous enough to defeat fantasy, yet incomplete enough to preserve wonder. That balance matters. These stones do not need to remain impossible in order to remain mysterious. In fact, they become more mysterious when they're understood as human achievements. A supernatural stone is simple in its own way. It floats because magic says it floats. It moves because an unknown power says it moves. But a human stone must pass through every hard stage of reality tool, marks cracked blocks, hungry workers, bad weather, broken ropes, difficult slopes, political decisions, sacred obligations, and the slow conversion of intention into weight. The more closely the evidence is followed, the less the achievement shrinks. It becomes larger because it becomes more detailed. Across the world, the pattern repeats with local differences. At Egypt's quarries and pyramids, stone reveals a civilization able to combine river transport, state organization, skilled labor, and royal ideology into monuments that reshape the desert skyline. At Stonehenge, stone reveals prehistoric communities tied to distant landscapes, the dead, the sun, and long ceremonial traditions that changed over generations. At Baalbek, stone reveals Roman ambitions stretched to a colossal local scale where the quarry preserves both triumph and overreach. In the Andes, stone reveals mountain societies that built with earthquake slopes sacred geography and imperial power in mind. On Rapa Nui, stone reveals islanders who transformed volcanic tuff into ancestors and may have moved statues in ways that made memory seem to walk. Each example answers part of the problem, and each leaves something unresolved. The unresolved parts are not failures of archaeology. They are the natural result of time. The most important tools were often the least likely to survive. Ropes decayed, wooden sledges rotted, earthen ramps washed away or were dismantled. Temporary roads blurred into fields. Workers' bodies vanished unless burial preserved them. Songs, commands, rituals, jokes, injuries, rivalries, and local knowledge disappeared almost entirely. The stone remained, but the moving world around it became invisible. This creates the illusion that the monument was placed by methods beyond ordinary life, when in reality, ordinary life was exactly what has been lost. What survives in the record suggests that ancient builders were neither primitive nor magical. They were practical, ambitious, observant, and socially organized. They understood that weight could be divided into stages. They used the landscape rather than fighting it blindly. They converted food into labor, into motion, into placement, and placement into memory. They made temporary systems to create permanent effects. They accepted slowness where modern people expect speed. They solved problems through repetition and coordination, not through a single hidden secret. Yet the stones still resist being reduced to technique. A ramp may explain height, but not devotion. A sledge may explain motion, but not why a distant stone was chosen. A labor system may explain organization, but not the emotional force that made a community return to the same monument across generations. A quarry mark may explain extraction, but not the moment when someone first imagined that the bedrock could become a pillar, a god, an ancestor, a royal tomb, or a wall that would outlast the language spoken beside it. Engineering answers the body of the question. Meaning answers the breath. The ancient stones require both. There is a danger in looking backward with too much confidence. Modern reconstructions can become as rigid as myths when they pretend to solve every detail. A method proven possible in an experiment may not have been the method used at every ancient site. A plausible route may not be the true route. A symbolic interpretation may capture one layer and miss another. Scholars still debate many details because the evidence is fragmentary, and because ancient societies were not simple machines producing simple monuments. They were living worlds full of change, conflict, invention, and memory. The best explanations remain open where the record is open. Even so, enough is known to change the way the stone should be seen. They are not puzzles left by vanished superhumans. They are not insults to modern understanding. They are evidence of what human groups can do when time, belief, labor, and organization converge. The ancient builders did not have engines, but they had systems. They did not have steel cranes, but they had ropes, levers, ramps, roads, rivers, and crowds trained by experience. They did not have modern surveying instruments, but they had chords, shadows, stars, sight lines, hands, and eyes sharpened by repetition. They did not need to be larger than humans. They needed to act together, and perhaps that is the most unsettling lesson. These stones do not show that ancient people possessed a secret now lost. They show that modern people may have lost the habit of imagining collective patience. A society that can wait years for a monument to rise, that can coordinate seasonal labor, that can treat a quarry as a sacred beginning, and a road as a ceremonial artery that can pour effort into something no single worker will ever own, lives in a different relationship with time. The stone's weight was physical, but the greater weight may have been social. It required agreement, obedience, devotion, fear, pride, or some mixture of all of them strong enough to keep people pulling. There were costs. Monuments are not innocent just because they are beautiful. Labor could be painful, coerced, dangerous, and unequal. Rulers could turn human lives into architecture. Communities could exhaust resources in competition. Sacred demands could become social pressure. The same systems that created wonder could also enforce hierarchy. To admire the stones honestly is not to romanticize every hand that moved them. It is to see both achievement and burden. The mountain moved because people made it move, and people paid for that movement in time, muscle, risk, and sometimes suffering. Still, after all caution, the result remains extraordinary. The stone stands where nature did not place it. A fragment of mountain becomes an ancestor, a tomb, a temple, a circle, a wall, a platform, a warning, a mystery. Its builders vanish into dust, but their decision remains visible. They took something older than themselves and used it to speak beyond themselves. The message is not always readable, yet its seriousness is unmistakable. Across deserts, plains, islands, and mountains, ancient people left behind stones that say without words that they were here, that they gathered, that they believed, that they commanded, that they remembered, and that they wanted time itself to notice. The stones still refuse their final answer because the final answer belonged to lives that are gone. But they offer enough. They show that human history was never a slow climb from helplessness to intelligence. Intelligence was always present, shaped by the materials, needs, and dreams of each age. The ancient builders who moved stones like mountains did not escape the laws of nature. They listened to them, tested them, and worked within them until the earth yielded one block at a time. And when the work was finished, they left the stones to do what human bodies could not remain. The last light falls softly across the stones, and the world around them grows quiet. The crowds leave first, then the voices fade, then the paths empty, and the great blocks remain where ancient hands placed them, holding their long silence beneath the sky. They no longer need to move. Their journey is over. The ropes are gone, the sledges are gone, the ramps are gone, the workers' names are gone, and the people, who once understood every mark and angle, have passed beyond memory. Only the weight remains. Across the earth these monuments stand like slow thoughts made solid. A stone in Egypt keeps the heat of the desert. A stone in Britain darkens under rain. A stone in the Andes rests against a mountain that still trembles. A stone on Rapa Nui faces inland, watching over grass, wind, and the traces of vanished villages. They belong to different worlds, different languages, different gods, and different fears, yet they share the same human wish to leave something that does not disappear easily. Time has taken almost everything around them. It has worn away ceremonies, broken dynasties, changed coastlines, buried roads, scattered tools, and turned living systems into fragments for patient hands to uncover. But time has not fully defeated the stones. It has softened them, cracked them, covered them with lichen, knocked some down and carried others into new stories. Still they remain enough to remind the present that ancient people were not distant shadows moving blindly through a primitive world. They were builders, watchers, planners, believers and survivors. They knew the stubbornness of matter and the fragility of life. They knew that a body passes quickly, but a stone can wait. Perhaps that is why these monuments still feel so difficult to leave. They do not speak clearly, but they do not feel empty. They hold the pressure of vanished hands. They hold the memory of effort without preserving the faces of those who made it. They stand between certainty and mystery, between what can be measured and what can only be imagined. And as evening settles over them, they seem less like solved problems than quiet companions of human time. The ancient builders moved stones like mountains, and then the mountains they moved became still again. Long after the last command faded, long after the last worker slept, long after the last meaning changed, the stones remained under sun, rain, stars, and wind, keeping their patient watch over a world that never stops moving.